podcast starts.
Listeners, welcome if this is your first time listening to us, and welcome back. If you're a returning listener, thanks for sticking with us. This is a podcast that talks about horror in film, TV, other media, other items which we think of as adjacent to horror, and sometimes other things from our lives which we'd like to talk about just because that's who we are. Our discussions aim to be fun, intelligent, and hopefully useful if your interest in horror texts comes from a creative or an academic perspective, but be warned, we do tend to swear occasionally, and if it's anything less offensive than the C word, it won't get bleeped. So if you are still able to go into your place of work, we may not be safe for it. In this episode, we're doing something we've wanted to do for a very long time on this show. Talk about the TV series Hannibal. Now, I'm TD Velasquez in Greater Manchester. As always, you can call me Dan. I have the great pleasure this week of being joined by...
Kirsty in Shropshire.
Also by...
Ian Winterton in Cheshire.
And finally...
Stella in Manchester.
I beg to differ with you there, Stella. I think we should give you your full title for once, Dr Stella Gaynor. in Manchester. Because later in this episode we're going to have two other doctors talking about Hannibal, and they get their full titles. So
right then.
You've always been wonderfully humble about your qualifications. So.
I never knew you were a doctor.
I am, yeah. I have a ridiculous amount of letters after my name.
Oh, wow.
Like, all of them, it would appear. I need a minute to think about what they are. What is it? It's BAMA, FHEA, PGCAP, PhD.
Wow.
That literally is all the letters.
That's a long tattoo.
Yeah.
Well. Guys, it feels like we've been away for a little bit. Of course, we haven't.
Yeah.
But last week, Kirsty and I were recording with our guests, who the listener will hear shortly, Dr Rebecca Williams and Dr Lori Hitchcock Morimoto. But we didn't get to record with you guys. So I suppose that only means 2 weeks, but it just seems like such a long time. How are you both? Ian and Stella, I'm talking to.
I'm tired, but I'm okay. And also, my son has gone back to school a week early, so I'm making lots of people jealous. So that's like having suddenly the day opens up instead of writing from 6 till 9 and then homeschooling. I'm now like taking him to school and writing till 3 o'clock.
Wow.
which is great.
Yeah.
Really?
So, yeah, it's like I've just got years and years put back on my life. So
wow,
we shall see. But,
we can feel the vim. Marvellous.
Vim.
How about you, Stella?
Well, like Ian, I'm tired, but I'm okay. My daughter's not gone back to school yet. She's in high school. She's going back next Friday, the 12th, for a day, and then the following week she'll be back in full time. But Ian, is your kids, are they having to do swab tests twice a week?
My older ones are that don't live with me, but
yeah, because she's having to.
Yeah, the first day of school is having their tests. Oh, really?
Yeah, she has to do it on herself twice in the first week, and then twice at home all the weeks after that. So she's
that sounds hardcore.
Not as impressed with that, but I have done the test on her before. She took part in a study over the summer, so I had to do the swab test on her before, and I felt really mean doing it because she was just like, so I was putting the swab in her mouth.
I just kept sneezing every time I've ever done. I just sneeze. That can't be good. Like,
Can I share the strategy at my college?
Yes.
So I work at a 16 to 19 FE tertiary college, and so over the next 2 weeks they are not having any timetabled lessons at all. We're going asynchronous for the first time in lockdown, and they are having to travel to college in order to get 3 tests over the course of that 2 weeks. And when they've had the third test, they can then have the home testing kits, which then they'll be expected to do.
They're being sent out.
So, so we've got 2 weeks off timetable, which...
Wow.
Just, it's craziness.
It's one way of doing it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like on one half of my brain, I'm thinking, I've got no teaching. I've got to have all this time. And then the other half of my brain is they'll be like, they'll be in contact all the time.
Yeah.
Wanting help all the time. There will be no division between my time and, So, so that's interesting. But,
I think she's prepared to do it, though, because she's dying to go back to school. So she's like, her take on it is, once I've done it the first couple of times, it'll be fine. So
you don't realise till they've gone back quite how much they've missed it. They don't know themselves because they've hibernated.
Yeah, definitely.
And they just go...
Yeah,
it's just
can't wait.
You just started gabbling and like picking up a million new words just in a few days.
They're going to be on the ceiling, aren't they, for a while?
Yeah.
I was meant to with one of my year groups. They're
not on my ceiling. So
well, we're meant to do a kind of a timed assessment I've got planned for the lesson they come back, or at least that's what I'd got planned for that lesson sort of generally. And I've had to change it because I just think I can't like first time they're all in a room together, I can't go right now you've got to be quiet for
test,
go and concentrate. So they're getting off with having that as homework instead. So
it's going to be chaos, but I'm a school teacher.
This feels like an education
anyway, this
podcast.
is a different podcast.
Yes, yeah.
And then I
killed the horror.
Kirsty, I do feel a little bit guilty because I just pointedly said, "And how are you all?" And then I went, "I mean, Ian and Stella." So
it's fine.
I am interested in your welfare as well, Kirsty.
Well, we're doing a Hannibal podcast, so I'm pretty good.
Good. Well, that's what I was assuming.
Good
segue.
So, well, before
I quite enjoy the fact we're about to do a Hannibal podcast.
That's great. I'm glad I'm not on my own in that. That's good.
Yeah.
Before we segue into that, though, we just have some news to mention. Stella, there was something on your mind?
Yes. Yes, rather. Sorry, I'm choking on myself. I got... my boss told me today that I suggested that I wanted to do a new module at the university, a horror media module, and they've said yes, and it's going ahead, and it's gone live now, and the students can choose it if they want to for their third year final theory module. So that's very exciting. So that means as well, if anybody remembers my stress last summer, that I still will have a job in September because I'm on these rolling contracts, so I never know. But now brilliant. In March, I know I've still got a job, and part of it will be teaching my own brand new horror module.
Oh, wow.
So that's exciting.
Well done.
Oh, excellent.
So come to the University of Salford.
Yeah.
I've stopped choking now.
Oh dear.
I'm all right.
You don't so that you don't have an ear in your throat.
No, I'm all right.
To look.
No, right. Okay.
I mean,
good to know.
Great news, Stella. Any other news before we go on? I just want to mention that possible news by the time this podcast goes out is that maybe I will have been vaccinated.
Yay!
I've got an appointment for tomorrow, but you never know. The last one my mum had was cancelled with 2 hours' notice. So
my God.
I think there are issues going on with how much vaccine supply is around and how long it can be kept for, and therefore they keep moving appointments around. But so, yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you. I'm actually kind of looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So.
Physical contact with somebody else.
Seeing somebody else in 3 dimensions.
Will probably freak me out. So I think it's time to move on to the big topic of the episode. Kirsty, I think it's only right for me to hand over to you, but I'm going to do so with this caveat. Not only are you a person who has been delighted to talk about Hannibal on nearly every episode we've ever done of this podcast, but you're also a published author on the subject.
Well, yeah, I am now. Only very recently, though. So, although I think I wrote that chapter about 3-4 years ago, so it's been a while coming.
Takes a while, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So the book is called Hannibal for Dinner. It's a collection of interviews and essays about this particular incarnation of Hannibal. So I'm very delighted. I've not actually got a physical copy yet. I know it exists in the world, but I have yet to actually kind of hold one. So I will be...
Let's read it yet, over.
Listeners,
I think it's on. You can get it on Kindle. No, it's quite expensive, but I think you can get a Kindle version, which is cheaper.
Oh, okay.
So it'd be lovely to actually read it
in
print. I mean, I've read it before, obviously, and I've got a copy that's signed by Matt Nicholson as well. So,
wow. What did the publishers arrange for them all to be signed?
No, so he was at a kind of a con at the NEC a couple of years ago, and so obviously we went, and I took this is how much of a Fannibal I was. I took 2 printed copies of the essay, got him to sign one, and gave him another one, and then kind of later I saw him, he was reading it, and I was made up.
Can I just say, like a minute late, but can I just say clang? Because it was
yeah.
Well,
yes,
wasn't me.
It wasn't Ian. I was listening to the story, and then I realised, oh no,
we're developing. So there'll be a link in the show notes for that book. We encourage our readers to at least look at the link, even if it is quite expensive. But the Kindle option sounds good.
Yes.
If any of you work in a university or college, though, you can get your institution to buy it and put it in their library.
Oh,
is it going to be online? That's what I was going to ask. Can we watch it? Can we read it through Open Athens or whatever it's called?
I don't know.
On our universities.
Who knows?
We should put your name in.
Yeah.
Pop up on those essays.
Yes. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, in danger of slipping back into the education podcast
Yes.
that 10 minutes ago. So,
Sorry.
Kirsty, why don't you tell us a bit about Hannibal and why you've desperately wanted to talk about it for so long?
Okay, so Hannibal then. So Hannibal fits into in order to sort of kind of jump on what Stella usually does, fits into a context of American quality television in the kind of early 20th century, kind of HBO doing its thing, ANC kind of doing something similar. So that kind of premium cable, everything looks amazing, lots of money, and it's challenging, it's dynamic. So NBC, commercial network, or commercial broadcasting in the States, looked at all that stuff and basically kind of thought, we want some of that pie, please. So they started developing or looking for different properties they could kind of develop in a similarly cinematic, interesting, complex way. They started prepping Hannibal in 2011. They brought on Brian Fuller, who was been a writer, director on Heroes, which was one of NBC's big hits. But he was also the showrunner and creator of shows like Dead Like Me, Pushing Daisies, which I love, and Wonderfuls, amongst other things. So NBC kind of basically ordered, pretty much it went straight to series, didn't do a pilot. They just, on the basis of the script for the first episode, they gave it a full series order. And the kind of interesting thing, of course, is that, and we talk a little bit about this as part of the discussion with Lori and Rebecca, is that the De Laurentiis company, Dino De Laurentiis and the De Laurentiis company owned the rights to not all of Thomas Harris's Hannibal Lecter novels, and had developed, kind of been the production company behind things like Ridley Scott's Hannibal film, Manhunter, and those kind of iterations, but not crucially Silence of the Lambs. So there is a kind of Clarice Starling shaped hole in terms of what they could develop. So the kind of the approach that Brian Fuller took to it was, he called it a sort of DJ mashup approach, which was kind of taking these elements from the novels, trying to kind of allude and point at the space left by Clarice. And yeah, so the result was Hannibal, 39 episodes, ran for 3 seasons between 2013 2015. Increasingly, what happened was that people kind of kept looking at it and going, why is this on television? Or at least, why is this on broadcast, free to view American television? Because it is baroque and gorgeous, but very nasty in places. It's kind of has a quite oppressive atmosphere, which kind of was developed a little bit initially by David Slade in terms of its visual style, who directed Hard Candy and 30 Days of Night and one of the Twilight films as well. And kind of he was really important in sort of developing the kind of look of the show initially. So, what else do you need to know? The cast is amazing, obviously. So Hannibal Lecter himself, played by Danish actor Mads Mikkelsen, who is was probably at that point best known to American audiences as Le Chiffre from Casino Royale, but had a obviously kind of big career in Europe, and Hugh Dancy, who kind of British actor, had done some stuff which has now fallen out of my head, but there we go. Go on.
I'm happy to admit that I know nothing of Hugh Dancy's prior career at all.
Yeah, well, so they were actually both in the King Arthur film with Clive Owen.
Oh, right.
And they were both, kind of not, the sort of the kind of the original Knights. So they knew each other from that, and they had this kind of friendship that kind of Brian Fuller.
Can I just say, I haven't met them, but I have met everybody else in that Clive Owen film. That's a
yeah.
Clive Owen, Jerry Bruckheimer, and Ray Winston.
It's interesting, actually. Kind of.
God,
sorry,
the one he kept calling Yo-Yo. What's his name? He plays Lancelot in that film.
I haven't seen it.
Ewan Griffith.
Yeah, and I got the impression he got bullied because Ray Winston kept going, yeah, Yo-Yo, we call you Yo-Yo all the way through. And he was like, yes, you did.
Yeah.
Bastard.
Bless him.
Expression on his face.
Yeah.
But yeah. But
so just to go back to Hannibal.
Yeah. I just thought I'd get the clanging.
One of the interesting possibilities for this for the show was that one of the kind of that they almost cast but didn't as Lecter was David Tennant.
Yes, I did know that.
And that so that was, that would have been a really interesting show, and I'm kind of I wonder whether or not it might have had slightly more longevity with an actor that kind of one of the criticisms of the show was that Mass's accent is not terribly easy to understand. You have to tune your ear into it. I think it's a bit unfair, but there we go. So it was. I don't know what else to say about it other than it's amazing. It has these big, kind of baroque murder tableaus. It's kind of playing with the characters that if you've seen the other versions of Red Dragon, Manhunter, Hannibal, whatever, they're all there. But some of them have been race flipped and gender flipped, and it feels much more contemporary. And because of who Brian Fuller is, it also feels very queer. And that's a thing that we talk about in the discussion. So yeah. I'm going to shut up now.
That was wonderful, Kirsty. That's the last thing we want you to do. I just want to say, I think it would have been a much less interesting show with David Tennant.
Yeah, I think it would be more mainstream, definitely.
Simply because he physically is too much like Hugh Dancy. There wouldn't have been a very good contrast between them.
Yeah, David Tennant's quite scrawny, isn't he, really?
I couldn't see David Tennant in that role at all.
No, one of the things I think why Mass works so well is that he has this quality about him, and part of it he comes back from the background of kind of dance and gymnastics, so he has this ridiculous amount of physical control, but he somehow looks like there's a line in the show about I think it's a Bedelia line about kind of Hannibal sort of having a very well tailored person suit. Right, so there's something about Mads Mikkelsen where he kind of almost looks like he's sort of carved out of stone, marble. There's, something, Brian Fuller talked about the kind of sort of seeing the character a little bit like a fallen angel, like he is kind of, Lucifer. And Mass is so supremely controlled in his physicality that there's something that is almost kind of inhuman about him. That is just sublime in the show, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he does play psychopaths quite often.
Well, but not in Europe.
No, well, I saw him as a psychopath in it was a Finnish film festival I was at, and it was a Danish film, and it also had 2 lots of subtitles running along the bottom, English and Finnish, and it had an apple in it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Adam's apples, yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the point I'm talking about is that in his European kind of filmography, the range of roles is much more diverse. And so he often plays quite sympathetic, kind of everyman, kind of flawed characters. Occasionally, sort of kind of crazy, slightly comedic. So like Men in Chickens and Adam's Apples.
And just like I see here on IMDb, he played Sniff in Moomins and the Comet Chase.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
He's going to be in. He's playing Prentice in the Chaos Walking film. That's apparently out this week, but I don't know where it's going to be out.
No. But, well, they're doing all the press for it, aren't they? As if it's a thing that's happening in the world.
Yeah, well,
I'm not sure
we're really excited about it because we love the books. I read the books to Emma. I read them to Emma and she loved it, and we were like, how are they going to do the noise? And it looks good.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah,
and
keeps saying out on Friday.
Haven't they compressed all 3 books into one film, or have I heard
I don't think
wrong?
so, no. Doesn't look like it.
Why would Hollywood do that?
I know.
They took the Hobbit and turned it into.
Well, yeah,
exactly. So,
it's like the inverse of that.
It doesn't look that way from the trailer. I don't think. No.
Well, anyway,
sticking
with Hannibal, but maybe we'll get to talk more about that some other time. I should have said this earlier, listeners. This is going to be the first of 3 episodes we're going to do about Hannibal. In this episode, we're only going to be talking about the first series, and our episodes on seasons 2 and 3 will come in our second series of the podcast, as we're going to in a few weeks be making a season break. And taking a couple of months off. What we're going to do now in this episode is go back to the conversation that Kirsty and I had with 2 very lauded academics who are also massive Hannibal fans.
Fannibals,
indeed.
Fannibals.
What a wonderful word. Dr Rebecca Williams and Dr Lori Hitchcock Morimoto. Listeners, if any of you listening have not actually watched Hannibal, I think clearly there are people on this podcast who want you to go and watch it, but also don't worry too much because, again, we strictly stick to the first season, and even within that, the academic discussion kind of stays away from spoilers. I can say that because we've already recorded it. The review with the 4 of us at the end of this episode, however, I don't know if that will be spoilerful or not yet. I'll put a warning in the show notes. But before we get to that, you can have a couple of hours of listening to Laurie and Rebecca's very erudite thoughts on the first season of Hannibal. And before that begins, just have a listen to a trailer of the show to give a feel for the programme. And listeners, just for your information, the sound you're about to hear does not come from an official trailer for Hannibal, but from a fan trailer created by YouTuber TV Junkie. There'll be a link in the show notes. I thought the sound from this trailer gave a better impression of the series and characters than most of the official trailers I could find. The trailer starts off with a reference to the Chesapeake Ripper, the main recurring serial killer in Hannibal, who the listener becomes very quickly aware is in fact Hannibal himself, although supporting characters don't realise this until a later point.
Chesapeake Ripper kills in sounders of 3. I use the term sounders because it refers to a small group of pigs. That's how he sees his victims. Not as people, not as prey. Pigs.
Mr. Graham, Special Agent Jack Crawford, I head the Behavioral Science Unit. I need you to help me with a psychological profile.
I need therapy.
What you need is a way out of dark places when Jack sends you there. I imagine what you see and learn touches everything else in your mind. It's pure empathy. He can assume your point of view, or mine, and maybe some other points of view that scare him. You catch these killers by getting into their heads. But you also allow them into your own. Because you are unique. If you follow the urges you kept down for so long, you would have become someone other than yourself. You hook them. I'll land them.
As an avid fan, I wanted to tell you, I am delighted that you have taken an interest in me.
I found a pattern, and now I'm going to reconstruct his thinking.
I have begun to question your actions. You are dangerous.
I am awake, and this is real.
Your personality disorders, all forgeries.
Discovered a truth about myself.
That doing bad things to bad people makes you feel good.
You said you would cover him. You could see he was breaking. I told you not to put him out there!
We are as close as we are ever going to get to catching this man.
God forbid we become friendly.
I don't find you that interesting.
You will.
So here we are. Kirsty and I now have the absolute pleasure and honour of being joined by Dr Rebecca Williams and Dr Lori Hitchcock Morimoto. Rebecca is Senior Lecturer in Communication, Cultural Studies and Media Studies at the University of South Wales, and Lori is a lecturer in Media Studies at the University of Virginia and a researcher of Transcultural Fund. Lori and Rebecca, welcome to Now the Podcast Starts.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
It's our honour. We've been looking forward to this for so long. It's delightful to have two professional Fannibals on the podcast. and I can't wait for this discussion. First of all, how are you both? Start with you, Lori.
Well, other than a quick trip to the emergency room the other day, which turned out to be absolutely nothing, I'm fine. Thank you.
Oh, well, that's wonderful news. That sounded like it was going to be more serious. It
was weird. I don't know what it was.
We have a roller coaster right away. That's great. How about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, not bad. Tired, but getting on with it, I guess. And yeah, it's been quite a good chance to go back and catch up and rewatch a lot of TV. So that's been one good thing to come out of the last year, I think.
Yes, and we wouldn't be doing this podcast, I suppose, if it wasn't for lockdown. Or rather, we talked about doing it for a long time, and it never happened. And then suddenly we had time on our hands, so we got ourselves organised. As our absent friend Stella observed, it only took the end of the world for us to get off our asses.
Could be said.
Yeah.
It's a motivator. Okay, so we all have different relationships to the TV series Hannibal, and I think that is a pretty natural place to begin the discussion. If we all talk about how we started our love for this show and our knowledge of this show, shall we start with you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I came to the series as a huge Silence of the Lambs fan. It was really a kind of pre-existing love of that film and some of the other, not a love of the other films, but having, read the books and really enjoyed those. So I came to it watched the first series, I think, early 2014, because I didn't really know about it. It was something that I don't even know what channel it was on in the UK, actually. I'd have to go back and check, I think.
It was Sky Living.
Sky
Living it was on.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, didn't have that. So it was very much kind of buy the box sets. Loved it straight away. And I think I must have finished it in about 2 days and was completely hooked by it. And then it just really started from there. It was the first program for a long time that I just really felt connected to and just became almost like an instant fan of the program, and then followed it through to the next sort of 2 series as well after that, when I was able to get hold of them.
So you were starting to watch it before it finished, but almost, if you started in 2014, it came to an end almost immediately, which must have been quite galling.
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember. It's, again, I didn't watch it when it was airing, obviously, the second series. So again, that was kind of getting the box set. So I hadn't seen series 2 until I think almost season 3 was starting in the US. And then, yeah, to kind of realise that was all there was going to be was quite disappointing. But without going into the detail about the other 2 series, I think what we do get is pretty as close to perfect as perhaps it could be anyway. So I'm kind of okay with that. I think if this is all what we have, I think it's so brilliant that I can live with that, I think.
Okay, well, I think we'll talk more about that in future episodes. How about you, Laurie? How did you come to Hannibal?
I'm like Rebecca. I was a big fan of the film The Silence of the Lambs. I hadn't actually read the novels, any of them, but I saw the film in a theater when it came out because I'm just that old. And that was one of, I don't generally, for this is a horror podcast, and I actually am not a big horror aficionado. And that was one of the few films that was sort of scary that I went and saw and actually really got scared by, because all the girls were overweight. And I'm like, oh my God, usually they don't want us. And, here's this guy. So, but I was, it was Jonathan Demme's attention, and Tak Fujimoto, the cinematographer's attention to how the camera was working in the film that really caught my eye. The way that Clarice was always sort of small and centered, the way that people looked directly, the direct address into the camera, things like that, just really grabbed my attention. And then that relationship between Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling, which is so delicate and fragile. And I really like that. And my husband also really likes the film. And so when we heard that they were going to be doing an NBC TV show called Hannibal, both of us were kind of, that cannot possibly, that no good can come of this. And so we sort of watched out of perverse curiosity. And it was, for me, I think the sort of moment was the red bathroom scene in the first episode. And I just remember thinking, oh, somebody loves this, which is a line from Silence of the Lambs, it's when he's looking at the moth and, somebody loved this. And we use that in sort of everyday conversation around here. But somebody did. And that was what really grabbed me from the get-go, was that, somebody loved it more than just thought this would make a great procedural or whatever. That was sort of, I was kind of hooked, even though we kind of fell in and out of it. And we ended up finishing the 3rd season after it had finished airing. Nonetheless, it was, we stuck with it for 3 years and we loved it. And the rest is history.
Wow. Marvellous. Sounds familiar in a lot of ways, but before I talk about that, Kirsty, how about you then? I know I've known for a long time how much you love this, but I don't really know how it all started.
Okay, so unlike Rebecca and Laurie, I wasn't particularly close to Silence of the Lambs or the other, kind of iterations of Harris's novels. I'd not read them. I'd seen the films, with the exception of the ending of Hannibal, because no.
Okay.
No.
The only good bit.
Anyway, so I kind of had this, passing familiarity with the works and with the kind of the characters. And when I heard that NBC were doing this procedural before Lecter gets discovered and he's going to go out in cases of all grave, I felt like that was the lamest thing I'd ever heard. It's like, really? And again, I think like Laurie, I kind of watched it out of this kind of, I watched it as it aired on Sky Living in the UK. And I was, sort of drawn to it because of the actors as well, Mads Mikkelsen and Hugh Dancy in particular, and Lawrence Fishburne, because he's amazing, obviously. And so the kind of cast impressed me, and then I watched the first episode, and that first sequence as Will kind of deconstructs his first kind of crime scene and goes into the killer's head was just not at all what I was expecting from an NBC show. It was just, and by the end of that sequence, before I'd even met Lecter, I was like, whatever this is, I'm here for it, and I'm in. And so I think for me, I've said quite a lot of times on this podcast about the moments in terms of discovering things that have got me to where I am now professionally, and in terms of my kind of fanishness. But Hannibal was the television show that brought me more to online fandom, because there is still is a massive community online, and it was really the place that I was able to. I found out for the first time that I could write and analyze and think about these things, and there was an audience out there for that type of thing. There was a discussion going on around those kind of things. So it's kind of my love for Hannibal has helped me develop professionally, if that's a kind of weird thing to say, but it has, because I got so stuck into it in terms of thinking and writing and reading and talking and whatever. So that's my experience of it.
That's fantastic, and frankly, the things that you love should help you develop professionally. If you don't have the things that you love in your professional life, well, then you're like most of the people on Earth, and we're the very lucky ones who get to think about the things we love in great detail in our work. So my story with this is the least interesting, but I'll just give you a quick overview. I was a fan of The Silence of the Lambs, and that led me to watch all the other films based on Harris's books. And then I read the book Red Dragon, which I love to pieces. I've never read the other books though, and I am kind of I have a slightly anal delight in comparing different versions of the same thing. So the fact that it had been filmed twice was just kind of wonderful, and I haven't watched it yet, but knowing that Hannibal the series approaches the story of Red Dragon and is going to do its own take on it is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. But I didn't actually start watching the series until basically my best friend just nagged me into doing it because it's his favourite series in the world. So in 2015, he gave me the DVDs of the first two series. I say gave, he lent them to me. He wanted them back, and he did get them back. But it took a while. And I watched them in a flurry. He didn't have... I think possibly Series 3 hadn't been released on DVD at that point. So I never watched that, and I've seen the first 4 or 5 episodes of it on Netflix, but then as regular listeners of the show may remember, a few weeks ago I sat down to watch it and found that it just vanished from Netflix. It was so heartbreaking. Luckily it's back, it's on Amazon Prime now, so I can watch it again. And my delight in it was everything that the three of you have said, combined with the fact that I just thought that even though I haven't seen the parts of the series which directly adapts Red Dragon, it's a great adaptation of Red Dragon. Most of the characters are there. Key events and moments are moved around, but they are there. I think that Lawrence Fishburne just is Jack Crawford. I think that Hugh Dancy, who's from Stoke-on-Trent, which is where I'd been working when I watched this, it was like, what? I'd love to hear him speaking in his own accent. I've never done
He's from a place called Stone, actually, I think, which is sort of between here and Stoke. And we've driven through many a time, and every time we've gone through, I'm going, this is where Hugh Dancy's from.
Wow. Blue plaque time, I think.
He can go from one accent to the next in like the blink of an eye. It's amazing. And then there was a video on Twitter the other day of him speaking French on some, cooking show, like competition show. And it's like, 5 minutes of Hugh Dancy just speaking in French. And it was like, sorry,
wow.
He's amazing.
No,
his
yeah,
accent,
absolutely.
speaking as an American, his accent is not bad. Every so often you'll catch like one little slip that he makes, but you have to be paying attention. And it's usually an intonation thing, not like a pronunciation thing. It's like he'll just hit the accent on a different place than we would. But he actually sounds to me like he's using an American regional accent. I couldn't tell you what region, but it does sound very authentic. He's good.
Yeah, he's great. He doesn't sound like the, generic American. I mean, I have some acting experience. You see on actors' CVs, they say they can do general American as one of their accents. What does that even mean? But no, so I don't know where we're supposed to imagine Will Graham is from. But, on the other hand, this is in the same franchise which had Hannibal Lecter played by Anthony Hopkins. And I don't think anybody knows where he was supposed to come from. But yeah, just going back to what I was saying, there were, shortly before I watched Hannibal, I had worked in a very cold hospital. Which is what I do when I'm not doing podcasts or bits of acting. I work for the NHS. And yeah, I worked in this really underfunded hospital project where they couldn't even give you a computer. You had to bring your own laptop. And they also couldn't heat the office, which we were in. And there was it was like Dickensian, loads of people with kind of fingerless gloves sitting hunched over laptops. And in order to just get myself through the long, cold days, I would listen to the soundtrack of Manhunter, the Michael Mann film, and which was obviously the first time anybody filmed Will Graham. And in a way, listening to what he's called on the soundtrack, I think it's called Will's Theme, I just kind of ended up listening to that on a loop. And even though there's the stuff that Brian Reichfeld, the music composer of the Hannibal TV series, it's completely unrelated to that, I somehow hear that music with Hugh Dancy's take on Will. He has this kind of subtle heroism of someone who's fighting the hardest battle, which is the battle against your own mind. We've all fought that battle in dark moments, but with this character, it's writ large. And I thought that in the film Manhunter, William Peterson did a really good job of showing that. When they remade it with Edward Norton, not so much. But Hugh Dancy's version really does it, and the series allows him to explore that thoroughly. And that's one of the reasons why it is much more than I agree with you, Kirsty, that the kind of one-line synopsis of the series, it's Will Graham and Hannibal solving crimes before they found out that Hannibal was Hannibal the cannibal. It's so much more than that. It could have been so naff, and there are so many series which are kind of similar pitch and are nonsense, but so. Yeah, that's my story, and I've gone on. So let's go a little bit deeper. So I think we've all hinted at the things which kind of hooked us into the series on our initial encounters, but kind of looking at the whole of at least Series 1, as we're discussing today, What do we think is really special about it? Again, can we start with you, please, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think for me, it was that I went into it not thinking I didn't really have any expectation for it. I hadn't really seen much sort of publicity. I hadn't seen trailers or anything like that. And so I was just kind of intrigued to see what it was about. And a bit, I think, like Laurie, that first episode where you realise that this isn't going to be just another NBC cop show, basically. And the opening sequence where Will goes into the house and has his mind flash or whatever what do they call it? You sort of swoosh.
I call it the light pendulum, but
swish swish.
Yeah.
I always kind of think of it as it's like somebody's holding up an ultraviolet light scanner, but it's not blue. It's kind of yellow.
Yeah. And so when I watched the first episode, because I knew Red Dragon and the books and the film so much, I wasn't sure if that was meant to be Red Dragon starting the series. So it's a bit confusing to me where I was narratively in the story. And then you spend so much time, I think, building up to the reveal of the first time you see Hannibal in the episode. You spend, I think, like 20 minutes or thereabouts before you even see him. And so you get to know, I think, Jack and Will, and they're interesting. And it kind of it keeps that back from you, and it keeps it. And then you get this kind of beautiful moment where, you know, they realize that the serial killer that they're looking for is eating people. And it's this kind of double bluff that it's not him straight away, obviously, but it kind of gets you. And I found that so interesting. And I think, I mean, Hugh Dancy's great, but Mads Mikkelsen in it is just delightful. He's perfect in that role, I think. And he brings a kind of like a comedy to it. He brings a likability to it. I think Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs is fantastic, but that's not sustainable as a performance across a television series because it's so arch. It's such a performance. And I think Mads Mikkelsen is so good at the subtleties of Hannibal, and that develops across season 1 and then later through the series. So I just found his performance so captivating, and I really wasn't sure where it was going to go. I really couldn't ever predict, even to the end of any of it, where it was going. And I think for me, that was what really kind of made me just want to watch all of it, and realizing that, yeah, it is something different. It is something that's had a lot of thought put into how they're going to adapt all those different kind of source materials, but still make something that's different and that you haven't seen before with those stories and with those characters.
Wonderful. How about you, Laurie?
I was listening to Rebecca. Yeah, no, I agree totally. I'm saying this having rewatched it on multiple occasions, so this is more of a retrospective what makes it special than in the moment what makes it special. But for me, I think probably more than anything, what makes Hannibal stand out is just its televisual audaciousness. And what I mean by that is while looking, especially in the first season, and I won't go into the second and third seasons, but especially in the third season, it's almost masquerading as a regular TV show in some ways. That's when its procedural aspects are at their strongest. And so it's very easy, especially in the first season, to go, oh yeah, this is, sort of in the same vein as, Mad Men or Breaking Bad or, quality television. It's just, it's horror quality television. But at a certain point in season 1, and I'll talk about this when you ask about our favorite episodes, at a certain point in season 1, it starts to become what it will be, and it starts to become. And and that is something that it's when people say, and a lot of people do, I can't believe what they got away with Hannibal on NBC. I can't either, but I'm not convinced that when I say it, I'm thinking the same thing as a lot of other people, and maybe I am. But the fact that, I don't know, it is just so narratively audacious. It is ahead of its time in terms of its storytelling technique and the way it kind of goes meta on the whole notion of writing and what it means to be an author. And I know I'm kind of like shooting way over like what the show is about, but to me, that's what makes the show so special. Is at the same time as you can say what happened in an episode, you can also point to these moments in almost every episode throughout the series that are doing something different. And one of the things that was interesting watching it with my husband, who is obsessively, maybe not obsessively, he is, verisimilitude is his thing. Realism is his thing. And it's impossible to watch television with him because he will sit there and just nitpick to death the realism of freaking everything. Well, that car's not, authentic to that year. And I'm like, I don't care. And Hannibal's the only show that I've actually been able to say, no, we're not going to do this. And let me tell you why. And talked about how it's not working in a realist frame. It's not even trying to be realistic. I live about a half an hour from Quantico. I live about a half an hour from Wolf Trap, the actual Wolf Trap, Virginia, which does not look like that, by the way. It's a suburb. It's a wealthy suburb. I live about hour and a half from Baltimore. These are long drives. And the fact that, the two of those people, Hannibal and Will are just like back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Hannibal's like, it's 7:30 and Will's not here. I think I'll just pop down to Quantico from Baltimore. That's a long drive. That alone, I thought that was brilliant, that they just didn't care about those stupid little details, or with the human totem pole when it's on that beach in West Virginia, which is a landlocked state. And I actually mentioned this at one point, and Brian Fuller responded somewhere like, well, they do have a lake. I'm like, yeah, it's like this little tiny lake. It is not, the wide open beaches of West Virginia, because there are no beaches in West Virginia. And I love that about this show, that it starts from a position of, I don't care. I'm just going to make what I want to make. And it very much becomes, I think, the show that they wanted to make. And I think that's what makes it so special.
Wow. Brilliant. Wonderful. Yeah. Kirsty, how about you?
Okay. So again, similar to both Rebecca and Laurie, the audaciousness of it is clearly a big draw. I think for me as a horror fan, I've always been really drawn to kind of aesthetic horror that has a kind of classical beauty, and that tension between, oh, it's horrible, but it's so well presented, and look at the color and look at the composition and all of that kind of stuff. And so the fact that Hannibal in that first episode with the I've forgotten the name of the body, the girl who is on the kind of the stag's antlers in the field, and it's golden hour and everything looks just stunning, and it's like, okay, I'm not overly keen on the fact that she's naked, but the tableau looks amazing, and the show kind of develops that as a thing that it does these big murder tableaus, and they are kind of artfully put together because of the artist, both intradiegetically and extradiegetically. Was really something I'd not seen before, or at least had not seen recently. I think it pleased me massively, and we're not going to go into detail here because spoilers, but that Brian Fuller talked about how he was influenced by Tarzan Singh's Cell, which is the only other kind of film that I felt had that same sense of kind of horror aesthetic. So that was a really big draw for me. And then I think it's not necessarily about the show, but it's connected to the show, is just the kind of fandom and the this is something more Laurie's area, but that kind of fan producer dynamic. Brian Fuller has always been, or was from the outset, really kind of positive about the fan reaction, and the conversations online around the show have a levity that the show itself is mostly absent, or it mostly doesn't kind of have. But there's just such love and kind of light and colour and humour in the fandom, and his interaction with the fandom, that's a real draw as well, I think.
I disagree that there isn't that kind of light and colour in the series.
Well, it's interesting to me because I'm a television binger. I love binging television. But Hannibal I couldn't binge because I think there's a sort of tone that develops. I think the music really feeds into that I just felt like I could, one episode was enough to be going with, and yes, there are kind of moments of lightness, and I think increasingly there are moments of lightness as the seasons progress, but I think season 1 in particular feels quite heavy at times, I think, for me anyway.
Yeah. I just think, this is clearly a deliberate decision that they've got 2 regular characters who are there for nothing but comedy. I mean, Zella and the other guy, one of whom is actually a comedian, isn't he? Who plays them? They didn't have to make those characters entertaining. They could have just been there to deliver facts. I that kind of runs throughout. Yeah, obviously, it is quite heavy overall, and I think my soundbite to describe Hannibal would be, it's basically the TV equivalent of red velvet cake. It's very, very rich. I think in the long run it's probably better for you than loads of cake. But I can understand you feeling overwhelmed when you've had several. I mean, I've just watched the entire first season in about a week and a bit, and I did flag in the middle, but actually, I do find it relatively bingeable, possibly because I've seen these episodes before. I think when I'm watching episodes for the first time, I want to concentrate on them and take them all in. But in terms of kind of boning up on the show for the podcast, I just kind of drank it all. Go on, Rebecca.
Sorry, I just think, coming back to the point about it being kind of the moments of the light and that, I think for me, I'm a fan of the series. I've been to kind of cons and events for it, but I wouldn't say I'm kind of part of the fandom around it, but I'm aware of, the humour that you get out of some of the kind of the memes and the interpretations of some of it, that, again, I don't know how many times I've watched it through now, but there are moments now that I laugh at, that I find funny, because I associate them with the way that I've seen fans kind of make them funny or make them into a meme, or I've heard the actors talk about what was happening behind the scenes when they were trying to film it. And so I think there are things that, the first time I watched it, I thought I was terrified watching season 1. Again, like what Laurie's saying, I couldn't believe that this could be on network television because of some of the murder tableaus. And I do think that there is a streak of very, very dark black humour through it, especially later on. But now I do find myself sometimes watching it and finding little moments funny because I know more about them kind of extra textually. And that's kind of interesting. Things that I was horrified by, now I'm like,
I've had the same problem with when I've made a couple of fan videos and 1 or 2 fan video essays about Hannibal, and especially with the fan videos, you're supposed to tag for any kind of content that might be disturbing, and I consistently fail to tag for gore because I forget that certain things are gory because I'm watching them through this. By the time I've made these videos, they're romantic, and so. This, not to spoil too much, but if I say this skinned man eviscerated whatever, that's a love letter, and so I forget that they're gory. I need to let people know. because I'm just like, oh, that's so sweet. You know?
That's so cute.
Oh, he gave him a love letter.
Yeah.
He might as well have just carved cannibal love. You know, I mean, it's that pathetic. But
Yeah.
Wow. I look forward to watching those, Laurie.
Yeah.
I hope they're available easily.
they are actually.
we should probably put them in the show notes.
We certainly shall. We certainly shall. Oh, that's brilliant. It does strike me that there is almost an invisible or subtle thread of humour running through the whole thing that is kind of there to be discovered. I mean, you could watch the entire series but not read anything about it and have no idea that every episode has a food-based title or you know, or a punny, and I think they're all French, aren't they?
Yeah, season 1's French.
Season 1.
Oh, season 1, just season 1. Okay, so
Season 2 is Japanese, and season 3 is Italian.
wow. Okay, so that much thought has gone into it as well. See that? Yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, being aware of those kind of things does lighten it a good way. Just to pick up on the point one of you made about how quickly you were enjoying the show when you watched the first episode, I think the first episode is such an amazing. I mean, I'm attracted to beginnings, and it sets it up so strongly. And I think that it really says something that as much as this show is called Hannibal and the character of Hannibal and Mads Mikkelsen is amazing, when I rewatched the first episode this time, I'd forgot by about 20 minutes in, I'd forgotten he was going to come into it. I was just really enjoying the kind of Will Graham, Jack Crawford investigation show. I just thought that worked so well. And also, I think they even introduced characters like Dr. Bloom before Hannibal, you know, and just everything works so well, and he's not even there. And then he kind of insinuates his way slowly into the series. I think it's just wonderfully done, and it's done with a great deal of restraint. That for the first half of season 1, he's not hugely involved in a lot of ways. It's more kind of the things he's doing off screen which are significant, but his actual presence and his on screen actions are kind of really dealt out with restraint. In terms of what makes the show special, I do love absolutely every aspect of it. I love the photography. I love the kind of atonal music, which is the brilliant way the soundtrack dances between the kind of wall of sound nightmare of Brian Wright's score, but also the very appropriate to Hannibal splashes of classical music and things like that. And every single character, I love the fact that it stands as a great, as I've already said, as a great adaptation of Red Dragon, I think, or the prelude to one. But it's also a wonderfully meta comment on the Silence of the Lambs in terms of its position in culture, which is really quite great, considering that they didn't have the rights to the Silence of the Lambs. It's the only one of Thomas Harris's books they didn't have the rights to. So they've got kind of, they're constantly winking at things from the Silence of the Lambs without being able to directly show them. So you've got Gillian Anderson, who, you know, whose career basically is owed to the Silence of the Lambs. I don't think without that film we wouldn't have the X-Files, and therefore we wouldn't have Gillian Anderson, I think. Then you've got, in another episode, Lance Henriksen turns up, who was basically playing Will Graham in the series Millennium, wasn't he? Which I only ever saw one episode of, but it's basically the same idea. Then you've got the character of Miriam Lass, seen only in flashback, who is basically Clarice. And little bits like, I think in a scene with Dr. Chilton, Hannibal says something along the lines of, it's good to have an old friend for dinner, things like that, which it's like so close. I almost thought, surely they were getting lawyers ready. at this point. But
I actually have an essay about exactly all of this. If you're ever interested.
All right. Okay. Certainly.
Yeah, it's in a book that's actually worth buying because it's affordable.
Right.
Called Becoming. It's up here on my wall. Genre, Queerness, and Transformation in NBC's Hannibal. I would really recommend the whole book, but the essay I wrote actually has everything to do with what you're talking about, and I love it too. It's so great.
Wow, fantastic. So that's a great recommendation. I think that brings us to the subject of our favourite episodes. What do we think are our favourite episodes of season 1? Rebecca, should we start with you again? You've got the look on your face of just the pain of like, don't make me choose between my children.
I probably will also forget what some of them are called because French is not really my it's not my language.
I've got them written down in front of me, so I'm sure I can identify.
Brilliant. I really like Coquille, the one with the angels.
I do too. Yeah.
I really like I think the scene of the angels over the bed is truly horrible, but beauty. It's what you're talking about, Kirsty, that kind of art horror kind of thing that comes together. And I think for me, I really like the way that in that episode you start to see more of a link between the cases of the week and what is going on with the characters. So you see Jack's realization that his wife has cancer. You see Will starting to really realize that he's mentally, in a bad way. And I think for me, a lot of those things really start to come together in that episode and get stronger and stronger throughout the series. Then, and I like the idea of the case. It works. Some of the earlier episodes for me, I find. I watch them because I like the character, but I find some of the case of the week stuff a bit of a slog, if I'm honest. And I think once they start to meld those things together, I think for me, that's when the series really starts ramping up to being, really fantastic. And everyone in that episode has something to do. Lawrence Fishburne's amazing in it. I say Hugh Dancy's fantastic in it. Hannibal's in it, but he's kind of in the background of it a little bit. And I think for me, that's the one that I always, when I'm rewatching it, when I know that episode is coming up, I'm always really pleased that I'm going to get to see it again. So for me, I think that's a good example of everything I think that the series does really well.
Wonderful. How about you, Laurie?
I had to review it a little bit. I didn't rewatch the entire thing, but I did go back just to make sure that the one that I thought was the one that I like best was in fact the one that I like best. And it is. And that would be episode 8, which is called Fromage. And that's the episode in which we have a psychopathic music store owner who is making strings out of human gut, not cat gut, played by the absolutely delectable Damore Barnes. And I mean, he was so pretty in this. And I know that this is probably not what your podcast is about, but I just have to say that there's not one person who looks bad in that episode. Everybody looks fabulous. It's a very Hannibal in general is a very aesthetically pleasing show on many levels, but good looking people are one of them. But the thing I love about this episode is that I think this is where, again, I said this before, but this is where the show that it's going to become really starts to show. And it does it in some really interesting ways, but one of them is just through the theme of friendship. This is the episode where not Tobias, but the other
Franklin. Is he Franklin?
Franklin, yeah. Thank you, who I love. And he's also beautiful in this, by the way. Sorry, but he looked great. He was doing his Hannibal cosplay.
Oh God, I never noticed, that's me in clothes, but I did notice.
Oh, the costumes in this one!
I just thought that
are amazing.
That actor had the most sound. This is my name sounds like my self name. He's called Dan Fogler.
Yeah,
you know, you just look at him and think, yeah, that's him.
He does. No, this is he's kind of sort of half in Hannibal cosplay and half in Tobias cosplay at this point, because he's really sort of, fixating on both of them. But, he starts off about, this is a continuation of, I just want to be your friend with Hannibal. And Tobias comes to dinner and says, I could use a friend. And Hannibal says, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And I totally don't want to be your friend. But then he goes to Bedelia and says, I kind of want a friend. And I think I know who I want to be my friend. And she's like, tell me, because I don't already know. And she names him, and he's like, yeah, and she's like, you're completely insane. But I mean, just the vulnerability. This is a very Hannibal centric episode, in contrast with some of the earlier ones in particular. And this is the last time we see him being this emotionally vulnerable for a long time, because he kind of seems to make a conscious choice by the next episode that, no, we are not going to do this business, because he's so affected when he thinks that Will is dead. And this is Mads, right? His micro expressions are the thing of the stuff of legend. But if you watch that last scene between Hannibal and Will 100,000 times, which I have, then you can just soak into the breath that he exhales when he sees Will walk into the room alive. And it is palpable. You can see his chest. I mean, it is beautiful. And he's having this real emotional moment that he clearly has no idea what to do with. And I love that that's basically sort of what precipitates the rest of the first season, that, this kind of, I am going to back away quickly from this business, and I'm going to be in control, and I think I'll frame him because it'll be good for him. I love that about this episode. But the other thing I really love about it is that stylistically as well, it's also gotten very confident by this point. And so it has those close-up cutaways of the gut that's being turned into the strings sort of wafting in the water. It's got this is one of the most visually dark episodes of the first season. Like, they're talking basically in a closet with a sliver of light dark. That really high contrast chiaroscuro lighting where you can just barely make out anybody, and how that reflects what's happening with Hannibal in particular, that he is becoming more and more opaque and hard to see, in terms of his motivations and stuff. I just love that kind of wedding of aesthetic and meaning that seems to really have reached a point of confidence by that episode.
Great. Before we come to your favourite episode, Kirsty, I've just had a thought, which I just want to air. Something that I think works amazingly well about the series, but I don't understand why, and I'd like your thoughts on it, is Laurie referred to how beautiful everyone is. And that's not just true of that episode, that's pretty much the whole show, and not just the people, but the way it's shot and absolutely everything. And usually, you do get obviously TV and film are visual mediums, and you get style heavy productions all the time. Usually I find that has the effect of distancing me from emotional involvement with what's going on. That doesn't happen in Hannibal. The characters stay alive, even though you're going, wow, isn't that beautifully composed? And you're going, wow, look at that decor or those costumes, or I wish Hannibal had chosen better curtains. That's the only kind of negative point. I
dare you.
I remember that came up in a review, and now I can't not see them. So every time there is a scene in Hannibal's office, I'm just staring at the curtains. But now the point is, yeah, I just the series is like the ultimate kind of unreal aesthetic piece, and it's full of absurdities, as Laurie observed, in terms of the logical leaps and the geographical things and that. And how did the guy with the wings hang himself to the top of that farmhouse? How? Just how?
Doesn't matter.
But yeah, I mean that's arguable. But I just wondered what people thought about why do we still care, even though it's so style heavy and you know.
Because
Laurie,
it's expressionist. Sorry.
Sorry. No,
No, go on, Laurie.
I never get to talk about this show. I'm so excited to be able to talk about it. No, because all right, so. Even in the first episode, but especially from about the time that Abigail wakes up and they're all talking, the three of them are talking in that kind of greenhouse thing. If you look, they make really extensive use of short focal length. I mean, they get the camera right in their face. It's focused on like a nose and maybe a cheekbone, and everything else is blurred. I mean, they are right in there, and the camera itself is so intimate and close. And I think that's one of the sort of visual things that encourages that kind of identification with all of them, is just, you know, how close the camera gets, how much it kind of, I don't want to say caresses them, because it really doesn't, but just that short focal length that shows up again and again and again is so important, I think. And it's something that if you're looking at some of these other shows, again, you know, Breaking Bad, Mad Men, those are sort of my two go-tos, which probably isn't fair. A lot of those kinds of shows are about alienation and about, you know, social or, social alienation, societal alienation, which would probably be social. And Hannibal is not at all about alienation. It's about finding people like you, finding somebody who understands you. It's about connection rather than alienation. And I think that because it's coming at it from that perspective, it makes it much easier even to identify with or sympathize with, even though he is a horrible, horrible, horrible man, Hannibal Lecter, because he is a bad, bad, bad man. And at certain points, you're just like watching, like, you bad man, you know, you are not a good man. And yet, when he's hurt, when he's vulnerable, and I don't want to go to my sort of go-to example because that's at the end of season 2, but it is a very good go-to example, and I will share it someday. But at no point, when he's hurt, he's usually hurt for very relatable reasons, which isn't necessarily the case when other people get hurt. And you know, other people like get stabbed, they get killed, you know, they get turned into violins or violas, whatever, you know, like weird shit happens to them, and you watch and you go, that is really weird. And that has never happened to me. But when Hannibal is hurt, it's usually emotional, and in one sense or another, we've been there before. And I think that makes him especially sympathetic. Sorry. That's
a great answer.
I love it so much.
Kirsty, you want to talk about expressionism?
Yeah, no, but I think that you know, that's kind of part of that. You know, expressionism tends to be, particularly German expressionism, obviously, which I, you know, kind of think that this has, as a show, has a lot of roots in. That, you know, the kind of point of that is about conveying and creating emotion. And I think with Hannibal, just, you know, to you know, kind of piggyback on what Laurie was saying, is that it's part of the mechanisms of how we are encouraged to like this horrendous character, because the show is it feels quite a lot of time, not just the murder tablets, but the whole thing feels like a kind of product of, you know, it's a television show made by Hannibal. It has that precision, it has that aesthetic. And so it's really becomes really easy to kind of, you know, kind of align with him, because we're being shown a world that is very much a reflection of how he wants the world to be. And yeah, and I think that does help, or kind of engenders a kind of an emotional connection with him. And you know, and Will's kind of emotional journey is also in that kind of similar mode. It's much more kind of fairy tale like, but you know, he's a precious little pumpkin, isn't he? But so, yeah, so
he's a sad puppy.
Bless Will Graham. Okay, so Kirsty, what was your? Oh,
can I also wait? I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
There's just one other thing, and this actually, if it gets back to the issue of costuming, and especially makeup and hair, which, you know, every show is attentive to. This is not the only show that has ever done this before, but one of the things that it's able to do, I think, because the titular character is also, sorry, an email just popped in. Because, you know, Hannibal is sort of ostensibly a kind of pseudo protagonist, but not exactly, that it can play with, you know, because we also know he's a horrible man. If you watch sort of in each episode the evolution or changes in Mads Mikkelsen's hair, those are character shaping moments. When it's slicked back like this, he is a bad man. But then you have these episodes where he's like, it's soft, it's freshly washed, it just dripped, you know, just into his face, kind of, you know, it's got this little fringe, and you're like, you are the prettiest psychiatrist, cannibal, killer I have ever seen ever, and I just want to pat your head for a while. And one of the things I like about, again, Fromage, is that at the end, you know, he's banged up and bruised because, yeah, he got in a fight, and then, yeah, he killed somebody. And it was the first time. But, you know, his hair is hanging in his face, and he has this kind of hangdog look. And it's completely genuine and at the same time completely disingenuous. And then if you fast forward to, you know, close to the end of the last episode of season 1, which I cannot pronounce, when he's in Garrett Jacob Hobbs's kitchen with Will, and they're having their sort of final confrontation, his skin looks oily, his hair is slicked back, his eyes, there's this thing with his eyes where they just look like almost like sockets. He looks so unappealing. It's hard to believe it's the same man, but he is sort of quintessential Hannibal in this moment. You know, this is who he is. And yet so is that other soft, sweet, pat him on the back and give him a lollipop guy that we saw at the end of Fromage. And those subtleties in makeup and costume, especially with Hannibal, I think also go a long way towards sort of cultivating our sympathies. When he looks sympathetic, you know, it's hard to say no. And when he shows up for the first time in Jack Crawford's office, you know, he's got this very kind of earth tones ensemble, and he looks so pleasant and nice, and he's wearing a sweater vest, for heaven's sake. You know, I mean, he looks lovely, and you think, what a lovely man. You know, if I didn't know who you were, I would think you were charming. And I think that goes a long way as well to both creating the character and its complexity, but also especially in kind of cultivating our own reluctant sympathies with him. Sorry, I could talk about it.
No, it's wonderful, Laura. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Your favourite episode, then?
Oh, okay. I couldn't really choose one. So I'm going to talk very, very quickly about 3. So I've already talked about the opening. The aperitif is just amazing, I think, as a good kind of starting episode. And then I agree with Laurie. The master choice is also kind of Fromage for all the reasons you talked about, but I think particularly it's the first time, I think, where, like, you know, we know what Hannibal is, and we've not seen him be physically aggressive, and it's that kind of a line, I think in not his first scene, second scene in Aperitif, where he's talking to Franklin. He says something like, don't worry, Franklin, when the lion, you'll know, or something like, you'll know when the lion is in the room, or when the lion is in the room, you'll know it, something like that. And there's just that kind of moment of the point where he turns from kind of being sort of civil and trying to manage the situation into, okay, now I am who I am, and you can all watch out. I think that was a really exhilarating sequence, and the first time to sort of see how physically threatening he could be on screen. And again, a lot of kind of props to Mass for or the cast, or at least Brian Fuller, for casting him as a kind of former ballet dancer, gymnast, somebody with an incredible kind of physical control. We start to get to see more of it in that episode, and then increasingly more as the series progresses. For me, though, I think episode 3, Potage, is also a really important episode. It's the one where Abigail wakes up, and we start to see the development of that, kind of that triad kind of relationship, and how Hannibal reveals more of himself to Abigail as a way of kind of ingratiating himself, or starting to use her as leverage. And we I think it's the first time we get to see, I think, the Raven Stag. I think I might be wrong. Which, is a kind of important symbolic.
I think it's in the first episode.
Oh, yeah, no. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We get to see more of it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But certainly, I always feel like the second episode, mushroom person, mushroom people, like we don't like it. Doesn't it? It feels like those two episodes 1 and 3, ought to sort of run together a bit more clearly, because it feels like a more complete arc. But I love that kind of question of Abigail, and to what extent she's complicit in any of this stuff. And these kind of moments where you think, well, she must, does she know? Does she remember? Does she recognise Hannibal's voice from the phone call? Those kind of questions, I think, are really great. And also, it looks great. The colour palette, those oranges and yellows, it's all very beautiful. So there you go. Those are my 3 favourites.
Brilliant. I'll just say that I've loved hearing all 3 of you and agreeing with all 3 of you one by one. I think it's much easier to pick a least favourite episode than a favourite episode, because I basically thought they were all great apart from one, which I'm not.
What one?
Well, I'm going to have to say it now, aren't I? Yeah, it's Trou Normand, I think, the one with the one with the totem pole.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I like that one,
It's fine. It's just that the totem pole is such an amazing, horrific image that I think that and that comes right at the beginning of the episode, that the rest of the episode, it doesn't have enough to stand up to that. I mean, the solution to the mystery in that episode is basically they look the killer up in the phone book and go round to his house, and he's sitting there waiting for them and doesn't even stand up, and it's Lance Henriksen. So I just found that episode is just marked by expectations not being met for me. But
I think that's one that feels like it's the most sort of killer of the week procedural, I think, for me.
It is very...
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow, okay, well...
Why do you like it, Rebecca? Yeah.
I really like that episode. It's one of my favourites. Why do I like it? I like the absurdity that we're supposed to believe that 95-year-old Lance Henriksen, these corpses are strung them together, and like it's comes back to what you're saying, Laurie. It's improbable, and I love that. And I quite the beach that doesn't exist. I kind of like the fact that it's, by this point, I think they're like, the procedural part of this isn't really relevant. So the phone book, why not? And there's no, you know what I mean? Like, it's not about how they solve the crime. It just, and there is a sort of theme in it that it's about family, that it's about Lance Henriksen's character thinks that he's killed someone because his wife got pregnant with his baby, but it's actually his, and he's ruined his own family. And it sort of ties in with where we're going, I think, with Will and Abigail and Hannibal and their kind of family push and pull. And we're starting to find out, I think, at this point, how much she knew about what her father was doing. So I've always thought it does something
Rebecca,
more for me than perhaps
spirited defense.
some of you guys think. But
I have the kind of temperament which I knew that when the question was, what's your favourite episode, I was going to say my least favourite episode. It's just easier. But it only stands out really because I loved all the rest so much, and especially the ones you've mentioned. Laurie, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, there's, getting back to what Kirsty said about German Expressionism, that's one of the episodes that has like a really quintessentially expressionist moment in Hannibal's office. After we have Hannibal going to his office door and opening it, and we get the Caravaggio Will Graham, it's a painting. He turns around, he's beautiful, he comes in, he's like, oh no, that's a different episode, but anyway, he does at one point do that. This one he turns around and he goes, where the hell am I, right? He goes into Hannibal's office and he is talking about how
it's beautiful.
Basically he was standing on a beach in West Virginia 10 minutes ago, and now he's in Hannibal's office and he doesn't know what's happening. But they use a track on that is also, I think, on like kind of a pivoty sort of thing. So if you watch the scene, you can kind of map what the camera is doing, but it's doing something very complex in the service of communicating Will's disorientation, which is an extremely expressionist thing to do. And I'm thinking especially, I can't remember the name of the film, but it's sort of latter expressionism. I don't know, Murnau.
Yeah, I was going to say the Murnau.
Yeah,
the last laugh.
Yes, the last laugh. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's exactly the last laugh, and it's exactly borrowing from that kind of, whirling around camera, but it's doing it really complexly. It's a nice shot, and I love it for being unnecessarily complicated. They could have not done that shot, but they're like, we're going to do the shot because this is the show we're making. And again, that's, yeah. Yes.
Just yes.
Fair enough. That is the answer to any question about Hannibal. So I think we might have already touched on some of these, but what do we think of the most horrific moments in the first season? Rebecca, should we start with you again?
Oh, I've got the cello guy. The cello.
Yeah.
That's I when I first watched the series, I was watching it, so I'd watch it upstairs and my husband would be downstairs, and before he started watching it with me, because I was like, you must watch this, it's so great, and he would say all he could ever hear was every sort of episode once or twice just me going, oh no, you can't do what, no. So he got intrigued. He's like, what the hell is this? And I think the cello down the throat was probably the biggest. You can't actually do that, and I think it's just so, the image is so horrifying, and again it's so much of what you see in Hannibal you don't really see. You see the kind of the after effects of a lot of it when you see the discovery of the bodies. It's kind of implicit, and I think you're right, that is a dark episode aesthetically, but I think it really is one of the episodes where you really get a sense of what's the process of how this is happening to people. And I think for me, I think for series 1 it's definitely that one.
I wouldn't disagree so much with that one. What do you think, Laurie?
I'm of two minds. In episode 2, the sort of half dead, half alive mushroom guy is a bit much. So just in terms of gore, that one I have a problem with. And I do have a friend actually who I tried so hard to get her to watch this, as I do with everyone, and I usually win. But she was like, I saw that and I cannot, I'm sorry, but I don't know when something else like that is going to be out there, and I'm just not going to find out. Fair enough. But you mentioned earlier that you had like a sort of one-line summary of the show, and I think mine would be that, for me it's very kind of David Cronenberg meets Douglas Sirk meets soap opera meets how do you say that?
Grand Guignol.
Yeah.
Is it Guignol?
Yeah. I mean,
possibly.
I have no idea.
My pronunciation is terrible.
But that's so is mine. I still can't say that last episode of season 1. The ear that Will throws up.
Oh yeah.
I really actually that's probably my worst, because I cannot take. I mean, it's just nasty, and there's like mucus and shit. And I just sorry, there's like mucus.
No, that's fine.
It's fine, don't worry.
We don't. We long ago stopped bleeping and swearing.
Okay.
That's the way the camera's down the throat, isn't it? And we kind of go.
Yeah, but not until later. I don't think. I think they don't show it until later, but like what he did. But we just get the barfed up ear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, are you kidding me, man? But that's sort of like, to me, sort of the beginning of the David Cronenberg-esque, body horror. Not that all of it isn't body horror, but it's an ear down his throat. That's gross. So I don't know, one of those, but maybe the ear a little more, which seems odd considering there are so many murder tableaux. I think it's not pretty.
No.
The murder tableau can be, sort of aesthetic in their way, but the ear is nasty. And I think that's my problem with it.
Yeah, there's very little direct nastiness. I find even the most horrific things, if they can't find a way to make it somehow sort of beautiful, then they discreetly cut away from it. I'm thinking particularly of the bit where the neurologist, his head has been kind of broken backwards. You can hardly see that. You can just see enough of it to go.
Yes,
awful.
Absolutely.
Kirsty, how about you then?
Yeah, so my kind of moment is the same moment is actually from that episode, which is number 10, Buffet Foie, I think.
Yes.
So that and it's not so much that, although that is horrific, and the whole kind of what's her name, Georgia
Manchin. Yeah.
The fact that she can't see faces, that's pretty, and Hannibal in his PVC thing, it's like it's a whole thing.
Hannibal in his murder suit, which we see twice, I think, in the season, and it's so great that he has that.
but sorry, we're on for horror. So that is like, gore is pretty nasty. But I just thought that whole opening sequence is the first time, but it felt again more kind of procedural and more kind of clearly horror, that following the kind of victim into her house and that kind of sense of the lurking, and then she's up in the attic, and although the footprints apparently on the dripping in, and it's all it's all very, very horror, and it does. But I remember watching it. Oh my God, this is horrible and creepy, and it's just that that long drawn out thing that I really kind of found affecting. I think the final moments of it where she gets whipped under the bed and there's the splay of blood felt a bit too kind of genre. But then we have the moment later where kind of Will goes from being in one place kind of nice and calm, and then the next moment he is murdering her, and he has the knife, and it's that was pretty grim and kind of shocking. But actually, I think that for me, I found a quotation. I can't remember where I found this, but I did find it at the time. Sadie Doyle. So we'll just read you the quotation. So the biggest scare of the first season wasn't a gory corpse display, though we had lots of those. The revelation that Will had encephalitis and Hannibal was preventing him from getting treatment. The primal fear here isn't axe murder, it's abandonment. All the blood in the world can't scare more profoundly than the idea that the people who care about us may be faking it. Which that for me kind of sums up what the real horror of season 1 for me is. And it's not, I think like Laurie, my understanding of kind of Hannibal's arc has changed slightly. So it's not that I think that he doesn't care, it's just that he doesn't care in kind of regular ways that would have been like, right, you're ill, let's go to a doctor, and then not kill the doctor and let you get help. Hannibal to gender is different, but it's in like I get so, I think the more I watch season 1, the more I get angry with Jack. Because Jack just, he knows, like in episode 1, Hannibal, says about, that Jack thinks you're like a fragile little teacup. And that if that's how Jack thinks of him, he's constantly kind of pushing him into situations that he clearly can't handle, but because he's getting results, that's okay.
Yeah, and that, Jack is the supposedly normal person.
Yeah, exactly. And irrational, but he wants results. And again, that it's not that Hannibal's kind of treatment of Will isn't horrific, because it is, obviously, rationally, but the fact that we have this character who is more rational, more normal, kind of abiding by society's codes, who is, willfully kind of, managing Will, or trying to manage Will, when he is repeatedly told that he shouldn't, it's pretty, negligent, and that's quite scary, I think.
Good point. Very much so. So, again, I really struggled to pick one massively horrific moment. There are so many. I think I might just have to run through a few. One that I didn't even think of before that occurred to me while you were speaking is the death in the iron lung caused by combing. Because that's one of the rare occasions where we see a death in the moment. In most of the series, it's either we see the aftermath, and when we do see it, it's kind of through Will's perception, where he is the killer. He's imagining himself as the killer. Although those sequences are actually usually pretty horrendous as well. And I think the kind of recurrent technique that you don't see an actual murder until later, when you see Will piecing it together and then reenacting it in his mind. In a way, that's actually more, possibly even more disturbing than if you'd seen the killer do it, because you like Will. That's extremely troubling that they keep doing that. But at the same time, there is real terror in that real-time moment of that death in the hospital. And another real-time death that I found really, really effective in a conventional way is when Dr. Gideon kills the nurse, which is, it's almost as if there's like, yes, we know this isn't like other cop shows, and it's not really doing the usual catch the killer thing. It's not really doing the fight scene thing. But every now and then it's like it feels the need to go. But it's not that we're avoiding doing it because we don't know how to do it, And then there's like a fight scene like the one with Tobias that we discussed earlier, which is just like amazing. And you go, whoa, okay, I'm convinced. And you're not going to see the murders, but then suddenly you have a sequence like the nurse being killed, which is just horrendous. And I think the fact that she's her eyes are gouged, and then she's kind of left flailing in the darkness, in her own personal darkness, that's really chilling. I think the angels with the skinned backs for wings is a stunningly horrific image, and especially when you think, I think they actually say they were alive for at least some of for a few minutes, with their hands bound together and their back skinned and all that. So why pick one? There's so many to choose from. It's
smorgasbord of choice.
Can I jump off something that Kirsty said a minute ago,
Sure.
real quick, about that betrayal being horrific, which I agree. I mean, that's, you were mentioning, Dan, earlier about how, the first episode and indeed, a lot of the first few episodes are very Will centric for, oddly for a show called Hannibal. And not to get too far down the path of my own personal prejudices, but it opens in very similar ways to the first episode of Sherlock. And one of the things having endured that all the way through. No, I loved it. I did until I didn't.
I know exactly what you mean, Lori.
They diverge at a certain point, and I think the point that they diverge at is where Kirsty is talking about, where it's these moments of just betrayal, where Sherlock went big to try and, you know, stun the audience, or, you know, amaze the audience, or scare the audience. You know, this is a big emotional moment. And they played it big. With Hannibal, they go in exactly the opposite direction. It's like, you know what, we're going to take this slow, and we're going to take it quiet. And ultimately, when we get to even greater points of betrayal, of anger and stuff, I mean, it really is, you know, those micro expressions that sell it. And where, when I was watching, especially the last episode of season 4 of Sherlock, and, you know, 221B blows up, and all kinds of improbable things happen that are just, you know, kind of over the top and beg the question of how realistic is this? You know, Hannibal has the benefit of having said from the beginning, not at all, don't worry about it. So it can do kind of what it wants. But when I contrast this upcoming moment with that, I think it's sort of, well, it's field kabuki. I used it. But it is. It throws into relief what it is that Hannibal is doing that is, I would argue, so much more elevated than a lot of scripted quality TV, in that it goes quiet, you know, like, bring it in. This is all about, you know, it hurts to be betrayed. And that is brilliant and terrifying.
Yeah. I can't believe we've not mentioned Sherlock until now. Kirsty and I have talked about Sherlock on record before. I don't go into detail about it, but in terms of...
No, interestingly, as has Lori. Because you were part of that same project, but just in different places.
Oh, really?
Right, okay, wonderful. Yeah, for the listeners, this was a few years back. And, you know, Sherlock is out of the remit of this podcast, I suppose. So I don't know when we'll get the chance to have that conversation again. But it did strike me on re-watching Hannibal. And I don't know whether I didn't notice this the first time. But I think Sherlock is the most clear antecedent to Hannibal. In terms of, because Hannibal is basically doing the same thing to the Thomas Harris books that Sherlock was doing to Conan Doyle, and I never realised that the first time round. It's basically going, you know this, so we're going to give it to you in a different way. I mean, Sherlock, for me, stopped working quite quickly, but what they set up was perfect. With Hannibal, they set it up and sustain it. As far as I've seen so far, anyway. And
to use an odious phrase, they lean into it. You know, they're like, yeah, that's what we're doing, and we're going to do it more, you know, and we're going to do it bigger. Where Sherlock was trying to please itself, I think, more than anything. But that conversation will go on forever.
That potentially is a whole other episode.
It really is.
I know.
On an entirely
I'm not going
different
to talk about Sherlock.
I think there's already enough hate on the internet. Mary Morrison is not a contract killer. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. Okay. Yeah. So, I think that we've kind of covered all the questions that we can cover without kind of going beyond season 1, really. I just think, is there anything any of you would like to say that's not been said so far that can apply to season 1?
Me?
Rebecca?
I just want to we've talked a lot about, obviously, the main characters, Will and Hannibal and Jack, and I just want to give a shout out to how brilliant Chilton is.
Oh, yes.
In this.
Yep.
I can't believe we haven't mentioned Chilton. And
Raoul Esparza.
He is so note perfect.
He is brilliant.
the odiousness of the way that Anthony Heal plays it in Silence of the Lambs, and just he's so, I love him so much in that role, and he's pathetic and horrible, and you kind of feel for him in a weird way.
You have to love him.
And he's thinking as well about what you're saying about clothing and the way, like his dress, the way they style him. He looks like a bad lawyer. He's dressed so specifically, and I think he plays that just from, I mean, and he's barely in it, actually. He's not in that many episodes, and I always think he's in more than he is, because he's so fantastic.
I think only 2 episodes of season 1.
Yeah, and he just makes such an impact because that character is important and is going to carry on being important. And when I watched it, I honestly had to check that it wasn't the same actor as was in Silence of the Lambs. I knew it couldn't be because time, age, but he so captures that, and I just think he's brilliant in it. And probably talk more about Chilton as we move to season 2 and 3 again.
Let's hope so.
I just wanted to shout out to Chilton because I love him.
Yeah, he's perfect.
They read something a couple of years ago, and this is not about Raul Esparza, but it was about Scott Thompson, who plays Jimmy Price, one of the FBI lab guys, and it was saying that he was really horribly miscast in the show. And to me, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what is great about the show and what makes it work. And I think Raul Esparza also taps into that. And that is that it is at its heart queer. It is, when Raul Esparza gets going later on, he is operatic in his ridiculousness, and he sells it, and his character knows everything that's going on, and he's too ridiculous to actually convince anybody. Where Will is tragic, Dak is God, and Hannibal is Satan. Here comes Chilton, just being hapless, stupid Chilton. And he's wonderful. And I think Scott Thompson also brings a similar sort of vibe, if not the same kind of, impact, simply by, himself being queer. And lending that sort of, I don't want to say something tacky, so I won't, but I probably will. There's a certain energy about the show that from the outset, and I think those characters, those actors help to sustain it, that says, yeah, we're different. We may look like the others, but we're not. And let me tell you why. And like Rebecca is saying, Raul Esparza is just, oh God. He is the best. I would watch him read the phone.
Yeah, he's perfect.
And he was funny. I was at this thing that Matt, the critic, Matt Zoller Seitz, was doing in New York a few years ago. It was like a panel discussion about Hannibal and fan creativity. And, he was asking for people, and I was like, oh, let me talk. So he's like, well, I can't give you any money. And I'm like, I'll come up to New York, which wasn't cheap. But I was like, I will totally come to New York. And so I'm on a stage with Janice Poon, at Zoller Seitz, Layla Taylor, who is a fan and also has written a wonderful book on Black Gothic, a couple of other people who were really interesting to listen to, and Raul Esparza, who's sitting next to me, and he seemed really surprised that people seemed to get his character. He was really pleased. I don't know if it's an actor ego, lack of thereof thing or what, but he was like, oh, so you guys saw that? He's like, yeah, I totally, and it was really charming. And I think, that's one of the beauties of Hannibal, is that there's just so much going on. It never gets worse on rewatch. It just gets better.
Yeah, agreed. And I think as well, kind of just, we obviously talked about Raul, but also Eddie Izzard as well as Gideon, and that just the kind of the I've forgotten the name of the episode now. I've closed my IMDb so I can't see it, but the kind of the whole, what is it, Colombian necktie thing. That also but just the way that kind of Izzard has this kind of this kind of unassuming weaseliness and confidence. Again, is kind of beautiful addition, I think, to the wider guest cast and the the kind of sense of the universe. I think
it's called Roti. That episode. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
What we've learned from this episode is that none of us are any good at French.
Could be said.
Roti is a kind of naan bread, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think with that accent, though.
No, it's an entirely different food called roti that we're being referencing. Is there anything else that anybody wants to get in at this point?
Yeah, one more thing. Sorry. It's the lack of other people to talk to plus Hannibal. I would keep us here all night. I'm sorry, but this is one just.
But this is why we need to do the other 2 episodes so that we have.
That's right. I didn't realize that I could say this much about season 1. Who was it that was talking about? Was it Dan that was talking about? The murder of the nurse.
Yeah, that's me.
So yeah, the other thing that I think is striking about that episode and that sequence is when it's Will who's doing it. They go to that directly after the commercial break and the credits. I can't remember, it's credits, commercial break, both, neither. And that's the first time that we don't have the pendulum, so we're just right there with Will. And suddenly, he is an aggressor in a way that he hasn't been with the sort of buffer of the pendulum. And I love, where in Fromage, that's the first time we see Hannibal sort of be serial killers, cannibal psychologist Hannibal, or psychiatrist Hannibal Lecter. That's, I think, really the first time that we see the true terrifying nature, horror. I don't want to go so far as horror, but like what it is that Will can do and what it says about him. And I love that because he is brutal in that scene, more so than he's been at any other point when he's been imagining himself. In that one, he is the killer. He enacts the entire crime. It's not just distance. It's very personal with the the eyeball thing and everything, and that also is just, it's one of my favorite sequences, even though it's hard to watch because of what it's doing with his character.
I agree.
It's just such a great show. If somebody hasn't watched it, listening to this, and watch it. It's the best show ever. It really is.
How many episodes of Hannibal on there, Kirsty?
It's probably about 36.
36. Yeah. So, maybe we should do 36 episodes. Although, perhaps that would...
Each episode,
that would make us... We'd need to rename the podcast, but I think... I'm glad I was right when I thought there's plenty to say. Let's do more than one episode about Hannibal. We've not even talked about Dr. Bloom, really. We'll do that again.
Well, the dogs, really. We've not talked about the dogs.
The dogs! We have to save the dogs for season 2 because that's when we can talk about Buster and not just Winston.
Sure. But
if you haven't watched it, none of the dogs die. And that's really important to know because people die left and right, but the dogs do not die.
They're fine.
Buster gets a little banged up, but he's okay. Which spawned like one of the best memes or like fan things ever. So.
Wow. Okay. I haven't watched The Silence of the Lambs for 20 years or so, but I was reading about it in Kim Newman's book Nightmare Movies last night, and isn't that a thing about James Gumb as well, that that he has no ability to empathise with human beings, but Clarice kicks his dog or something, and and he howls with rage. So not
he's
all
all
bad.
about Precious. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course he is.
You hurt my dog. Don't you make me hurt your dog.
Brilliant. I think what I'm going to do is, when I've finished rewatching all of Hannibal, I'll watch The Silence of the Lambs just because that's the missing bit, even though it's not going to follow on or anything. And I'm kind of afraid, I've not rewatched any of the movies since seeing the show, but I'm kind of afraid they'll all feel a bit weak in comparison. But
think of it as a palimpsest of texts, that each one is in some way or another speaking to the others, and it actually works really well.
Yeah, actually, that's true, and that's something I meant to say but didn't say. Reminding me, Laurie. Yeah, I do like the fact that I love the fact actually that the TV show Hannibal seems to take choice aspects of the aesthetics of both The Silence of the Lambs and Manhunter. It's just you've got like the modernist bungalow that the amazingly named Dr Bedelia de Maurier lived in, which is very like the home of the Tooth Fairy from Manhunter. But then you've got the Baltimore Criminally Insane Institute Sanatorium, which is obviously it's not a copy or anything, but it's clearly inspired by the version of that place that was shown in Silence, down to the brick walls and the bars and things like that. And of course, because the character of Dr. Gideon, who's already in there, even though this is years before we know that Hannibal gets there, we get to walk down that corridor, and Dr. Bloom sits in that chair like Clarice does in the movie. And final spoiler warning for those who've not seen Hannibal Season 1, we're about to talk about the ending to the season. And soon after that, Ian and Stella will return for our full spoiler discussion of the season, which will include more of that kind of thing. So, last chance to go and watch Season 1 right now.
It feels like this is like the perfect moment to kind of make the connection about the way that the season 1 ends. With this inversion of relationship, and it's music. There's such a knowing moment, isn't it? Of kind of it's okay. He's still free, but here's Will. Will.
The music is from the film Hannibal as well.
It is. Vivi Corleone is it's the opera that Hannibal and Patsy and his wife go to.
In the film.
In the film, and so it's that. I mean, that's the humor of the show. It's like, you know what? We're just gonna throw the music because it defies narrative realism as well. It's like basically, I loved that music from that movie, so you come in. I'm gonna put you in right here. Yeah. And Hannibal's gonna walk down the hall like an asshole, and it's gonna be all sort of, and the music augments that at the same time as it kind of captures sort of Will's real hell. When it starts and he stands there at the beginning of the hallway, just like, and then starts walking down the hall, and you're just like, you dick. And I'm sorry, but it's true, and he is, and it's so wonderful because that music, he can hear it in his head, and he's just like, this is the best moment of my life. It really is. And he just walks down the hall having the best moment of his life. And if you don't know what music is, it doesn't take anything away from that moment. But if you do, it's a wonderful little.
Have you seen that? There's a kind of deep structure analysis of the way that kind of the journey between Will and Hannibal kind of works across the first season, from him being up on the top of the kind of book level in Hannibal's office. And there's some analysis about how it's, the whole first season is very much about kind of luring the frightened little animal down to the point where you can trap it. So that there's that whole kind of transition from, you know, kind of just waiting and coaxing and being calm to that, that kind of fun. And then you know, so not Hannibal's aim throughout the first season isn't clearly always to get Will to that place, but to get him to the point where he's, you know, his existence is completely controlled by Hannibal. I really like that journey.
Yeah.
My argument was in the essay that I was talking about. Mine was basically that season 1, Hannibal Lecter is. I saw it as sort of meta commentary. The series is meta commentary on authorship, and it's season 1 Hannibal that is the auteur. That is, you know, I am writing this, and I am writing you, and I am writing your life, and I have decided that you won't know that you have encephalitis because I don't want you to do that, you know. And so he's very much in control, and I think, but I mean, I think that's also one of the beauties of the show, is that it lends itself to those kinds of analyses, that there's so much going on that it works on multiple levels, and it's a commentary on so many different things, and it's
perfect.
Sorry.
It's a really great structure for season 1 as well. I feel vindicated that we're just talking about the show season by season, because the fact that the season follows Will to that cell and then you stop. Obviously, the story goes on later on, but it's just a perfect ending, because the audience knows from the start that Hannibal ends up there. But what they're given is the inverse of that.
It's a lovely thing.
And it also, the fact that we track that kind of psychological slide on Will's part throughout the episodes. What I think is really, again, to use one of the first words I think you used, Rebecca, the audacity of it. You know, I don't think there's a treading water episode in it where it's just they solve a crime or whatever. Every episode seems to have a change, a descent in Will's mental state and things like that. It's tracking it all the way through, and therefore, and also when you've got subplots about Jack's wife and things like that, it really is. I think, Laurie, you said it was ahead of its time in terms of, you know, so much TV is serialized now. They're doing an amazing job of kind of not being serialized, but also totally being serialized. You know, the episodes. I should try and just sit down and watch a random episode and see what that's like. But the narrative throughout the whole show and the characterizations are so kind of linear and compulsive, and everything is so fluid. I think that's great. It is a very satisfying season, actually, which is not to say I'm not going to go and watch season 2 very soon. Well, I think have we covered everything we'd like to say about season 1?
I think so.
Probably not.
Well, of this sort of thing.
Yes. Do we have a year? Maybe.
Oh God.
Maybe we'll do some more. Anyway, we shall talk about future seasons at the very least. So, Lori, Rebecca, we've covered season 1 of Hannibal, well, at least as far as we can in the limited time that we have right now. It's been tremendous fun, and you'll be coming back to join us for season 2, won't you? So, thank you both. Thank you very much, Lori.
Thank you for having me. It was really delightful.
And thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much.
And we look forward to you coming back. So welcome back, this is Dan, and once again here with Kirsty, Stella and Ian. I'm just reminding you listeners of who we are, because you might have been away from us for a very long time listening to Kirsty and I talk to Lori and Rebecca. That was incredible fun, and we're so grateful to them for spending that time with us, and we look forward to them coming back and talking about seasons 2 and 3 of Hannibal at some point in the near future. We're going to put links and details in the show notes to Lori and Rebecca's various works, especially as pertain to Hannibal particularly. But for right now, I think it's time for us to talk about, it's time for us to give Hannibal Season 1 the And Now the Podcast Starts treatment. Ian, I'm tempted to open the discussion with you.
Okay.
Maybe that was just because you had your hand up, and that was like a psychological signal to me, but maybe you were just yawning. Anyway.
Also, I thought you were going to say, because I'm the newest to this, I hadn't watched Hannibal. Again, one of the wonderful things about doing this podcast is you go and rewatch movies you think you made your mind up about in the 90s and turn out to be wrong. But also, I haven't quite, there's so many things to watch, I hadn't quite got the message about how good Hannibal was. And it really is very good, especially the first season. I would say I was gobsmacked because obviously you watch everything. I watched this on Amazon. It was on Netflix before.
Yeah.
And I was gobsmacked to find out it was NBC because, as we were saying to, people like Stephen Volk the other week, we're, getting horror onto terrestrial TV when you don't know if, little 5-year-olds accidentally watching or granny might have tuned in. Is exactly why they're very conservative. I was gobsmacked this was NBC. But what's strange, and I do think there's probably acres of essays to write about this, is Walking Dead is like this as well. It seems to be there are no boobs, there's no sex, but there is so much gore that's permissible.
Yeah.
That's all right in American culture.
Mm-hmm.
The dismemberment, the sadism, real stuff that really. I'm fairly strong stomach, and I was eating my tea watching this and having to put my plate down because it's a disgusting, depraved, beautiful program. But it's has something happened now that programs like this can be on. Can you imagine something like this being made by the BBC?
No.
But you would have said that a few years ago about NBC.
No. But there's a kind of a fun anecdote about in one of the episodes when we talked about in the discussion, Coquille, where the Weeping Angels. Mm-hmm. And because it's two naked people, kind of apparently they're kind of television standards people were like, no, you need to have like more blood, so that we can't see the kind of cracks of the behinds. So we just need more gore to to conceal the obvious nudity.
We are a strange civilization.
This is just
an odd situation. You see the makeup artist being like,
we're like half the Roman Empire. We like the violence, but we're not. Just cut each other up in the arena.
Yeah.
But don't show any nudity.
I also love the way that, we've said this before about The Walking Dead, nobody swears either.
Nope.
But in terms of this show, that works beautifully with the aesthetic, I think, because it's all about, what's Hannibal's word? Courtesy and, shunning discourtesy and things like that.
So therefore, they don't swear, to be honest, but they don't. It is strange, the priorities of network television, though. That Cannibal contains some of the most graphic scenes I think I've ever seen. And so does The Walking Dead, come to think of it. So what is that about?
Stella, I think maybe this is the point for you to come in. I know we've discussed this on the podcast before, but not when Ian was here. So, this is definitely your area, Stella.
So, basically, NBC, CBS, ABC, all those ones, they're all fully advertiser-supported networks. So all their money comes from the advertisers. They come under federal law, federal ruling called the FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, and that's basically their Ofcom type situation. And because that's a federal thing, they can say no swearing, no tits, no this, no that, no the other. And then when it still makes Hannibal stick out as being so graphic because it is on ad-supported television. But then if you move over to The Walking Dead, because that's on basic cable, that doesn't come under the FCC. So The Walking Dead and American Horror Story, The Strain, all those things, they have their own internal broadcasting standards and practices department, and it's just up to them to decide. So if you look at The Walking Dead, there's no swearing, but there is swearing on American Horror Story. You know, it's the same economic model where they've got cable carrier fees and advertisers, but they've got their own internal broadcasting standards and practices department, so it's up to them. And certainly with American Horror Story, their broadcasting standards department have basically just gone, oh, what's the point? Do what you want. There's just no point anymore. With 9 seasons in, it seems to be working. Go for it. But with NBC, just sort of stay in this vein rather than having to come back to it. Obviously, my initial reaction when watching anything that's American and TV and horror is to start thinking about, well, who's made it? Why have they made it? What are the conditions of it being made? And in the early 2010s, NBC were floundering a little bit. So they were always in the top 3 in terms of their viewership, their advertising money that they got. They were always doing really well. And then in the last couple of years of the 90s, early 2010s, NBC were at the bottom of the pile of the big 5 networks, so they were having to really pull it back. And in doing so and needing to pull it back, or any commercial channel, any network channel, they create audience targets to sell to the advertisers. They're not necessarily interested in what the audience wants, they're interested in what the advertisers want. And in the early 2000s, NBC was saying to their ad people, they're like, look, we want to be as particular as possible with our demographics that we make our programs for, so that we can give you guys more specific targets, so you know who you're going to advertise to. And rather than just thinking about age and gender when they were looking at their data as who's watching what and when, they started to look at audience behaviour as well. So they were quite pioneering in that respect, but they wanted to be as specific as possible with their audience target, so they could take that to the advertisers and go, we're going to have, females aged 18 to 35. They're in the market for a new car. They might want a new kitchen at some point. So really, really, really specific stuff. And nobody was really thinking that way. So that specific thinking had an effect on the type of drama that they were doing. They saw what was happening with The Walking Dead and the immense success. And like Kirsty said, they were like, yeah, we need a piece of that pie because we're struggling here. We're losing viewers, by the 1,000 over time because people are starting to get Netflix. People are getting bored with network. So they were like, right, we need to pull something out of the bag here. And it needs to be incredible, which led them to make such a bold move as they did with Hannibal. And it was an incredibly bold move because it is beautiful, but it's really, really graphic. And that's one of the reasons why it kind of didn't fit very well on the channel, which led to its eventual cancellation. 3 seasons in and they cancelled it, and it was a fan favourite, but it didn't produce. Did I write the figures down? I don't think I did. But it didn't reach the numbers expected of a broadcast network. So they're spending all this money on it, and it was expensive. They're saying to the advertisers, these are specific groups that we will offer you via Hannibal, and there just wasn't the numbers. So even though they had all these specifics in place, they're still at the end of the day a broadcast network, and they should still be fetching massive, massive numbers. And the advertisers were like, we don't want to pay as much for that because the numbers aren't doing it, mate. Sorry.
Right, so
which led to its cancellation.
So it's not quite, the HBO effect hasn't quite reached.
Not by 2013. More so, but this is still in the very, very early years of channels really relying on serial drama to bring audiences and to keep audiences. Now it's the landscape shifted again, but so in 2011 when it's been in development, and then when it's been out in 2013, it's still, in terms of my research, it's still the very it's only the first 3 years of the horror cycle that exploded onto American TV. So it's still a bit, I don't know if maybe it should have been done for a channel where it had more of a easier to find audience, perhaps.
I guess if
it's NBC.
Yeah, it's interesting because it comes out, isn't it, at the same time as we get things like Bates Motel and things. So there's this kind of again, kind of postmodern, kind of rehashing. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but rehashing of kind of familiar.
Well, it's plundering of IPs, basically.
Yeah.
What's got audience recognition? We can.
It's the built-in audience, isn't it? Because they know there's an audience that's built in.
For me, there's two things I'd like to contribute to that. One is that when we, kind of when the DVDs and Blu-rays came out, which of course I got, they were kind of BBFC rated them as 18, which just shows you the kind of level of kind of graphicness. So it doesn't surprise me at all that, I mean, critically and kind of fan reaction, it was massive. And it was also one of the first big fandoms to kind of blow up on, kind of social media platforms like Tumblr. But it doesn't surprise me at all that it didn't kind of get the numbers actually on broadcast, because it was never really a kind of properly broadcast show. It felt like they were trying to do two different things. Satisfy advertisers, but also make this kind of critically worthy thing. And not and kind of Brian Fuller was clearly more in that one camp of I'm going to make this thing, and he allegedly has this kind of had this big arc for sort of 5 seasons, and it was all kind of plotted out in his head and all that kind of stuff.
It's a shame.
but what's interesting though is that kind of for me, and again we're not spoiler territory, but it feels like kind of the first season is sort of Hannibal as a show, not the character, sort of finding its feet and kind of getting increasingly confident with what it is. And what it's doing, what it's saying, and then by the time we get to the kind of final episodes of season 3, it's just it feels like it's so confident, and it doesn't give a crap anymore about the kind of even entertaining the idea that it's for a mainstream audience. It's just let's chuck it all out, let's just go crazy, and so there's a sort of delicious kind of ostentatiousness than that journey of traveling from something that feels initially in the very first episode as feeling sort of kind of procedural, but something a bit different, but it still feels like familiar to where it kind of goes. It's crazy time.
That's what I was going to add on, that it's I think in the first season it was sitting on this balance, like a seesaw balance. It's like, is it a crime procedural or is it horror? And I was watching the episodes, and each one it was like, it's very formulaic, and I didn't expect it to be that formulaic. So we've got a murder of the week essentially going on, and then there's a bit where they're in the the pathology lab, and then they have to go out to the scene, and then they come back, and then Hannibal's in his kitchen, and it's like just hitting these same points every episode. And I was like, okay, so it does feel in its form like a network television procedural drama, and then somebody's been gored on a load of antlers. What am I watching? Who is this for? It's like, so I can see how it kind of missed what it was trying to do in terms of we're going to make this, it's beautiful, it's incredible, but it's a procedural, so it'll fit with all our other dramas like Law and Order and Chicago Fire and all those things. It sits in that box, but then also but it's a horror as well, and there's a cannibal in it. What? So it just at the start it was just a bit, what's going on here?
It's an unusual beast. It kind of, why are antlers so scary as well? Because it kind of straight away reminded me of True Detective, which obviously came after that. The first episode of that has antlers and Lori, and has a almost that's Hannibal, but done exactly right. That first season of True Detective. Without any compromise, because I believe that was that HBO?
It was HBO, it was.
So that
it was HBO.
It's almost like Hannibal wouldn't have happened because somebody at NBC wanted a recognisable property. So, but it's wonder what would have happened if that idea had somehow developed at HBO. Like how much more. It's really good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dismissing it, but I can also see why it failed for NBC.
Yeah,
and why. I guess in some areas, maybe it does feel a little bit prosaic, and then it's mad. So it's it is a weird mix.
Yeah.
Maybe that adds to the madness of it.
I think for the people who like crime shows, there might not have been enough crime in it. And for people that like horror shows, there might not have been enough horror in it because they're having to balance it over time. So it's just
people that like cooking shows. Come on. Hurry up and cut them up. I want to see the cooking.
just to predictably play devil's advocate for a second, is that kind of not what the properties are anyway, in terms of they are, you know, serial killer crime thrillers?
Yeah, the psychological thrillers, aren't they? It's the sort of standard way of describing Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, you know, where it fits on television, I totally get what you're saying in terms of form, Stella, and kind of where that fits on network, but it's not out of keeping with what Harris's, you know, kind of...
No, it's very much in keeping with those. And
Yeah.
I, in a way, I think one of the effects that the Silence of the Lambs had on cinema was that, because of its huge success, other movies that were kind of crime thrillers kind of started to go, oh, we need to be a little bit horror.
Yeah.
We need to add a bit more, and horror films kind of went, oh, we need to be a bit more forensic. We need to be a bit more profilery, and therefore you got a lot of, rip-off kind of movies in the 90s, like the appropriately named Copycat, things like that.
Yeah.
But also Seven comes out of that.
Oh yeah.
Which is its own weird masterpiece.
Well, yeah, Seven is the example of the rip-off that finds a way of elevating the genre and takes the next step.
Becomes its own. Everyone after that was like, we need a Seven.
Yeah.
And, so yeah.
Yeah.
It's, but as a property, I found it. A lot of this is a discussion about season 2, because they do this a lot in season 2. Is it's almost like it's made for somebody who doesn't know the books or the films.
We see, yeah.
And then if you do know them, you're there going, "What are you doing? Oh, great! You're playing with me now, aren't you?" But so it's really entertaining if you know the books.
Yeah, it is.
You know the stories, because they deliberately use your knowledge against you, which is brilliant.
So, do you think? I mean, this is something I kind of meant to ask to Lori and Rebecca, but maybe it's something we'll talk about as we go into later series. But do you think it... Stella?
Yeah.
Are you a fan of the Thomas Harris books or the other films?
I've never read them.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So I'll just ask you then. I mean, because Ian said he's the one who's come to this latest, but I think you'd only seen the first episode of Hannibal before this.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So what did you make of it, and do you feel that it worked as, as someone who's not familiar with the source material so much? How did you feel it worked?
I did enjoy it, and I will finish it, and I'm going to have to finish it because I'm going to write about it in my book as well.
The Copycat.
I was surprised that it leaned so much into being a procedural.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be a more, I don't know. I thought it was going to be more complicated than it was, I think. And, there is layers and character development and all that lovely stuff going on. But certainly in the first half of the first season, I was just like, I just feel like I'm watching a gory CSI. And it's, well, that's, pretty savage thing to say about it. I think as a whole piece, it's like, this is, in the first instance, I've written the word beautiful down so many times because it just is. It's beautiful to look at. I feel like every frame could be, a poster on your wall. It's gorgeous. But I was just,
I don't know. If that totem pole as a poster on the wall, I would get the fuck out of it.
But yeah, I think I was expecting, from the way people have talked about it over the past, 5 years, I thought it was going to be more complex, and I wasn't aware that it lent so much into being a procedural. So I was watching it, and then when I was thinking, well, yeah, it's on NBC, isn't it? So that does make sense for it to take that sort of narrative form. Whether it leans out of that in the second and third season, I don't know. Maybe it does get more complex, but for the first ones, I just felt like I was watching a slightly more horrific version of things like Law and Order. But that's not to say that that's not enjoyable, because that's all good stuff too in its own way. But yeah, it wasn't what I was expecting.
I think it was fairly complex if you think about all the twists and turns as they are we in spoiler territory now?
Yeah, we are.
As it leads to, because basically the sort of end point is obviously at some point Hannibal, because all we know is Will Graham was the man who brought Hannibal down. That's the sort of lore of the original books and stuff, and suffered greatly doing it. And they've done the whole, well, let's stretch a prequel out. Which is really good, but also they're not saying this is canon. This isn't like, this isn't, this is its own thing. So they're doing what the hell they want with it. But the fact that the aim of the arc of season 1 is actually the opposite is, this is where Will Graham ends up in Baltimore State Penitentiary for the criminally insane or whatever it's called. That's the opposite of how you think this story ends. And I haven't seen season 3, so I don't know anyway at the end of season 3. But if you think, Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs are both post Hannibal being brought to justice. And in this, I guess they could have carried on, but then I know they start using things from Red Dragon in season 2 that aren't in Red Dragon, but they use them in a different way just to mess with us. But no, I thought it was quite complicated. If you sort of just think about all the different things where you end up with, I thought my favorite episode was, and it was the most horror one as well, and this is where Kelly stopped watching with me, so that's how scary it was. Is the whole woman in the woods, the malnutrition, the woman in the woods. That's a sort of American tradition as well. You get that with Mama and those sort of movies. Weird people living in the woods, and there's a X-Files episode as well which touches on that. People living feral in the woods is scary for some reason, isn't it? And those episodes for me are really successful. And then what happens to her in that hyperbaric chamber is pretty amazing as well.
Yeah, that was my most horrifying moment.
Yeah, there are a lot of twists and turns, and I think it starts off being, I'm a procedural murder of the week, but it very quickly goes, no. I think after about episode 2 or 3, you realise, no, this is an ongoing narrative, and you can't watch these episodes out of order. So in that way, you could stick, in other NBC shows, you could stick them on in any order because that's kind of how they're designed. It's doctors and nurses, or it's friends, or it's, whatever, whatever's going on. You kind of don't need to worry too much about, it's all about the story of the week.
I think I just meant I didn't think it would echo all that stuff quite so much. I thought it would be just straight up complicated drama without hitting all these sort of repeated sequences.
No, I know what you mean.
I just didn't think it would do that.
I did initially go, I'm not going to like this if it's murder of the week.
Yeah.
Because already on episode 2 when they had the fungus brain thing, which is just fucking horrible.
It's really good.
It's brilliant. It's so inventive, but I've got a strong stomach, and this show has turned my stomach more than so many other things I can do. The being buried alive and being used as a sort of fungus thing.
Can I ask you a question though, Ian? Did it, on the one hand turn your stomach, but then in other moments make you go, look at that plate of food?
It really made me. I think it's a really good. I'm not vegetarian, but it kind of made me go, "Oh God, we are just eating virtually sentient creatures," and it's a good reminder that pigs are pretty much us. And it was weird because they're using, I bet they're using cut up bits of not of human, but of everything, every other beast going apart from human, and that's kind of disgusting. And it just made me think, they've got a great big liver there, and the only reason we're feeling grossed out is because it might be human. But do you know what? It's really gross. He says, having chicken for tea tonight. But, it's... I'll
tell you this, watching so much Hannibal in a small space of time has kind of messed up my visual recognition of food and human viscera. The other day I came into the living room and Mum had the TV on, and I looked at the screen and thought, someone's preparing a meat dish. And then then I blinked and realised, no, she's watching Holby City, and the camera's inside someone's stomach.
So yeah, got a fun related trivia on the show is that they had a kind of cannibal consultant, so somebody who's kind of an expert in okay, well, if you're going to eat humans, like what would you do? What are the best bits? How would you serve it? How would you cook it, etc. And they also then have a culinary artist, Janice Poon, who it was her job to kind of teach Mads Mikkelsen kind of the culinary techniques and also arrange those beautiful kind of plates that he serves up.
Platters.
So there's a whole book that's just about the food that you can buy.
Wow.
Called Feeding Hannibal, which is all about her work on the show. So
it's not like this is illegal, and there's a big disclaimer. Killing people for the purposes of eating them is wrong. But if you did, here's some recipes.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, then it's not the long pig in the book. There are other meats substituted.
I have to ask how you become a cannibal consultant without first getting arrested.
I think, from my understanding, I've forgotten the name of the guy entirely, or I've mislaid it, but I think he comes from a sort of kind of anthropological background.
Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah, that old chestnut.
Yeah. Well, I was in a really bad plane crash in the Andes, and now this is...
Oh, dear. Okay, I just want to quickly talk about stuff that I love in the show that, I didn't fully get to say last week in the discussion that we just had, but also that the riffs a bit on what Ian and Stella have said. So, I love the way the show is a police procedural formulaic, but layers in very quickly additional stuff. I love the first episode so much. As I said to Lori and Rebecca, I love that it sets up a really engaging procedural team even before Hannibal enters the show. I was quite happy to just watch more of this. But then they very quickly and very elegantly kind of seed Hannibal's malevolence and dangerousness into the very first story. The first episode, I think Hannibal comes into it about 20 minutes from the end. In that time, they solve the murder, they find the serial killer, they have a confrontation with the killer, and Hannibal demonstrates his hideous, amoral, gamesmanship by ringing up the killer first and saying, they know. Which is a lovely moment. All of that stuff is done with such efficiency, and the fact that you also, within that 20-minute period, you get the relationship between Will and Hannibal. That's where it starts. It moves so quickly and so beautifully. I just think the first episode is so impressive. I will counter that by saying that I also thought that the kind of killer of the week thing is a bit of a danger. Not because the killers of the week aren't great, because they do come up with loads of different incredibly inventive ways for people to be mad killers and to create incredible death tableaus. But because I thought in this universe, Hannibal himself is an extraordinary, terrifying character because he's such an intelligent human who is able to be a creative killer. And if you surround him with loads of other genius killers, then it runs the risk of making him seem less special. I think they knew that within about 2 episodes. Maybe they knew that from the start.
Hopefully they planned a little bit a little bit more in advance.
The series does that. It kind of skirts that danger, but it veers away from it almost immediately.
It's is the cello player, is that season 2?
That's season 1.
That's season 1, yeah, it is, yeah. Because that was a moment when I was a bit, okay, you've maybe overpopulated. You've maybe got how many people get killed in Midsummer Murders? Why does everyone get killed in Oxford? And kind of thing. And there was a little bit of, okay, maybe too many clever serial killers just starting to edge in there.
Too many well-dressed, sophisticated, educated, cultured.
Most serial killers are mad. You know, I'll do a clang here. As Alan Moore said to me, when I was interviewing him about From Hell years and years ago, he was very much serial killers. 99% of the time are less than us. They're not Hannibal Lecter in his memory palace. You know, pulling the strings and listening to the Goldberg variations. I thought of that quote all the time when I was, for some reason, because he listens to Goldberg variations a lot, doesn't he? It is a bit of a weird cliche. It's a bit like autistics are all like Rain Man. It's a bit like serial killers are actually more like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. They're horrible, grim perverts who we should condemn. But you know what I mean. They're not clever geniuses who are superhuman. No. They are grim.
There's something very wrong with them.
Who generally kill women for horrible psychosexual reasons. So having one Hannibal Lecter as an aberration, who's very good at catching the horrible Buffalo Bills of this world, is kind of something I could go with. Hey, there's so many of us guys walking around in suits, and I do work with cellos. That was the time when it did feel a little bit like it was jumping the shark. There was going to be a club for supervillains.
But I kind of think that is the exact moment that the series moves far enough away from it, though. I mean, I think that killer, Tobias, as he called, is
Tobias Bench.
He's wonderful name. See, I don't know if that is a Thomas Harris derived name, but it sounds like one. I kind of love the detail of that. The series almost boots that convention out of the door with a stunning fight scene, though. At that point, and but I'm just in there by that point.
I mean, I'm splitting hairs or sinews, fingernails. But just again, the tableaus are just like the art department must have just had so much fun.
Oh yeah,
they were just like,
they had a riot,
what have we got to do today? We've got. I mean, that totem pole is. I wouldn't want it on my wall, but it was truly disturbing and satanic, and like I said, I've seen some things in
I've seen things, man.
And also the cello coming out of somebody's body. I mean, amazing effects work apart from anything else, and they actually managed to disturb me, which is pretty good going.
You know what? I didn't get to mention this last week. The bit that kind of sums up the beauty of horror in that it made me go, but also, can I look at that a bit closer?
Yeah.
Is the character who's dragged under her bed and killed and left with a Chelsea smile, or a Glasgow smile as it's called on Wikipedia. And there's just the moment where Will is imagining himself in the room, and he looks to one side, and the corpse is there with the smiley face, and the camera rack focuses from Will and gives you a really good look for quite a long time at this, where you're looking through the slice in the face and going, I can see her teeth.
No, that was the episode where they went, right, we're going to be full on horror movie because it's a scary woman in the woods. But yeah, that really creeped me out, that whole episode, in a brilliant way. Yeah. The rest of it's like, this is gross police procedural. That one had me maybe feeling like I was being followed when I went up to bed, which is
again
a good horror movie. You got that someone's behind me feeling.
Just wonderful writing as well, though, that they created that monster, but then made her sympathetic.
Yeah.
So you know.
But time is marching on, and I am also. Yes. I am desperate to talk about season 2 because I just finished watching it today, and I think season 1 is a lot more straightforward, and season 2 is where, for me, the plot and what they did with the property they borrowed, because they really played with me and got me. So tune in.
Fair enough.
Another time.
I'll keep going.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
As Ian says, we are kind of running out of time. Is there anything anybody would like to say about Hannibal season 1 before we wrap up this? Kirsty, possibly you've said everything you want to, but maybe that can never happen.
No, I don't think it can. I mean, I love season 1, but I do think when people talk about the show, in terms of the kind of beauty and it's it's what makes it special and complex, I think that is very much about season 2 and season 3.
Or we could debate the silly cave bear.
Yeah.
That's a future debate point.
Yeah.
Cave bear, silly.
Yeah, yeah. But no, but also the dogs, just the dogs, the Will Graham wolf pack.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
They're just a lovely little kind of thing to just have them there as a fun, lighter element.
I do love the way they're set up as opposite. Yeah, it's obvious stuff, but opposite. He is Mr. Memory Palace, and everything is in control. And Will is. I like to stand in a river.
Yeah.
And those as a hero and a protagonist and antagonist, it's great.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they've made the decision, whereas Will Graham in the novels, or really the novel, because he's only really in Red Dragon, I think. Mm-hmm. He's got a wife and son, and he's defending a normal family life. But in the TV series, they've got he doesn't. He just has dogs, lots of dogs.
Yeah,
lots of dogs.
That's better.
Yeah. No, I'm really looking forward to watching season 3.
Yeah.
I'm desperate to. I might even jump on it now because season 2 left me going. Actually, to be honest, I did watch it. 10 minutes of him in Paris. It's quite fun. Spoilers. But yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
we'll get there. Okay, so that was Hannibal season 1. It's been a long time coming. We finally did it. There's lots more fun to be had yet. So, listeners, it's time for the Bag of Death. And I am joined once again by the marvellous Howard. Hello, Howard.
Hello, listeners. Hello, Dan. Are you all right?
Oh, I'm very excited, as I always am at this moment. So, listeners, this bag contains all the English language horror films that both Howard and I have seen at some point in our long and meandering lives. And we never know which one's going to be drawn from the hat next. I am now rummaging.
Rummage.
I'm going to try and get one from deep within the pack. What have I got here? It is The Plague of the Zombies. Now,
wow. Class now.
We seem to have gone to a bit of a trend where we talk about films that we have actually already talked a bit about on the show, but mostly last time we spoke about this movie, which was, I think, in our very first episode 5 years ago. And to be fair, I don't think that episode's on this podcast feed, so some of our listeners haven't heard it. And we were mainly talking about the music then, but let's talk about this movie. So it's 1966, isn't it, Howard?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's mid-Hammer, when they had a bit of a renaissance. They sort of because things hadn't. Some of the films in the early 60s hadn't gone so well, like The Phantom of the Opera, hadn't, and one or two others, the Dr Jekyll film, and then suddenly there was this resurgence.
I think Hammer's big success in the late 50s, early 60s had petered out somewhat because there were censorship changes, and they were discouraged from making full-on horror films. Then that changed again. I'm not sure exactly how, to be honest, but we got the resurgence of Dracula then, and we got more films, and we got this film, which is,
I think, a bit of a classic. Actually, it's one of the best films Hammer made.
I think it
works really well.
It's great. I've seen it several times. Yeah.
I've seen it a few times now. I've got it on DVD. And
a couple of years ago, Grimfest screened it in Stockport at the Plaza, and our friend Ross and I were lucky enough to go and see it. And he'd never seen it before, and it went down really well. So it's written and directed by John Gilling, and it's not connected to any previous Hammer series. It's not a sequel to anything. It's kind of a unique entry in their canon, although it's part of a duo of films they called the Cornwall duo. I think fans refer to them as 2 movies, both set in Cornwall, both directed by John Gilling, kind of made back to back at the same time, with roughly the same cast as well. But the Plague of the Zombies has a lot that's unique about it. So Howard, why don't you talk about what you remember and know about the movie?
Well, I just think it's interesting because when we started this, we were talking about, when we started doing the podcast years ago, it was the films of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. But this is a film that doesn't have Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, although you can see them in the 2 main parts, perhaps. It has Andre Morel as the kind of hero, although he's a middle-aged hero, sort of getting on a bit, and John Carson, who was an actor I particularly admire, as the villainous squire. And it's interesting really because he dabbles in the dark arts and stuff. He's been able to raise the dead, and what he does with these zombies is get them to work in his tin mine, so he doesn't have to pay anybody.
Yes,
that'd be the kind of plot. He's got them all working down this mine, but he also kidnaps young women as well, and has evil way with them.
Yes, well, he's kind of modelled on the sort of Sir Hugo Baskerville archetype of the kind of terrible squire, landlord. Yeah,
it's great because it is the only time that Hammer did zombies. And
yeah,
so they had their take on it, and it works. I just think it's done really well. Like all the best Hammer films, the production values are really good. It's very professionally made. There's a lot of expertise made in it, and it's got a really good cast. Andre Morel is terrific, and John Carson, and Jacqueline Pierce is really good. I think Michael Ripper's there as well, with a policeman who sort of put his hands on his braces.
Right, yeah.
And there's a particularly memorable sequence set in a graveyard, which is should I say it's a dream sequence?
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
I didn't dream sequences or anything like that, but it's. I think that's the sequence that people remember, and it is really scary. It is really well done, and it's just fast paced, and it's good. It's just a really good film, and it's made at that time when Hammer kind of had this sort of like got back into what they, got back into the earlier style, like the earlier films, and.
Yeah, it kind of feels quite like Kiss of the Vampire or something like that. One of their kind of first flood of horror films. I think we should say that for listeners who aren't familiar with it, although it fits into Hammer's gothic horror kind of period horror overall style, it does nudge in other directions, and it's important to note that. I think it's the last kind of major zombie film made before George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which forever changed how zombies were portrayed in movies and what they meant. Zombies in the Plague of Zombies kind of fit into the kind of Haitian voodoo kind of inflected version of zombies that was familiar from earlier movies like White Zombie, and involves black magic and things like that, and doesn't involve flesh eating or anything like that. But
flesh eating zombies are not. They just stumble around and just do what they're told.
Yeah.
And mud and tin.
Yes. Although they are frightening.
No, they're very frightening. It's actually quite a scary film. I think it is one of the scarier Hammer films, and first of all, I think Andre Morel is great as one of the great things that Hammer did was it gave middle-aged actors the chance to be the hero.
Yeah,
and he's the hero. He's the kind of star, and he's the one who has fights with people, and he rescues everybody, and it's great. And they, actors like Clifford Evans and Andrew Keir were given the chance to they didn't have the conventional romantic lead. They had more interesting kind of characters playing the leading role, and I think he comes over really well in this film. It's a shame they didn't make a sequel with him, with that character in.
Yes, he's dynamic. There was an entry in the Mummy series from Hammer that John Gilling also wrote and directed, The Mummy's Shroud, which has Morell as the lead, and he's a similar kind of presence and a similar character, but unfortunately he doesn't last throughout that whole movie.
No.
Which is another one we'd like to talk about sometime. I do think it's interesting that although this movie kind of predates George A. Romero's, reinvention of the zombie archetype, it does prefigure the fact that Romero was always using zombies as a way to comment on social problems.
Yes.
And The Plague of the Zombies actually does that too, albeit in a kind of retrospective way with its basically, there's a lot of class conflict in it, isn't it? It's about the kind of upper classes exploiting the lower. There's actually an explicit kind of critical subtext within it about the way that kind of the upper classes or the rich kind of go to nefarious ends to avoid having to share their wealth.
Well, yes, you get that a lot in Hammer. In Hammer, aristocrats and the upper classes are invariably bad.
Yeah,
from Dracula kind of downwards. It's sort of like in Twins of Evil, it's the aristocrat who's the bad guy, and sort of all the goodies are sort of like the ordinary villagers kind of thing. You get that through the whole of Hammer, and in this certainly, yes, there's that feeling of he is the wicked squire. He thinks he can do whatever he wants. He can exploit people. You know, he's using these zombies to work this mine to make money. I mean, that's so. Yeah, there is that there, and it's interesting. It's an interesting film because it's Hammer doing what it does best, but it's doing something different. It's doing something new, like the reptile. The reptile's also that. It's a new idea. It's something. It's not another vampire or whatever. It's and that's what makes it interesting. It's sort of like they're doing something different, but they're doing it with all the Hammer expertise and all the Hammer style.
Yeah, although there is an interesting point that's made by Jonathan Rigby in his book English Gothic, where he says that The Plague of the Zombies can be regarded in a way as the most faithful adaptation that Hammer did of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Because although it's zombies, not vampires, you've got the aristocratic villain, you've got the Van Helsing type character, which is Andre Morell's character. You've got Lucy, the young woman who becomes a vampire in Dracula, is changed into the Jacqueline Pierce character, who becomes a zombie. Quite a lot of the character archetypes and the plot developments are there. So I think if you're a fan or a scholar of Dracula, it's a film worth checking out for that as well.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's interesting. Yes, John Carson would have made a very good Dracula.
Yes, he certainly would have. Yeah, and I mean, he is in one of the Hammer Dracula films, isn't he? He tastes the blood of Dracula, but he doesn't play the Count. It's still Christopher Lee, as he is in nearly all of them, except the very last one, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. And that's a shame.
We'll also talk about at some stage.
I'm looking forward to that one. It's always fun to talk about. So. But is there anything else you'd like to say about The Plague of the Zombies?
Well, it's interesting because I mentioned in previous podcasts, I always think about the circumstances when I first watched these films. And most of the films we talk about, the Hammer ones, the Amicus ones and all that, I watched when I was very young, when I was a teenager. But this, I didn't. I didn't watch this until maybe when I was in my 20s or even my 30s the first time. So there's no nostalgic element to it. It's a film, for me, that kind of stands on its own. I like it because of its own merits.
Yeah.
It's a really good film. And it is a film I watch every so often. I think it's just extremely well done, and it's interesting, and it's eerie, and it's got like doing something. It's set in Cornwall. It's not set in Transylvania. It's not set in Karlstadt or whatever all the other ones are set. It's set in Cornwall. It's set in England. So, and that makes it interesting. It's a different location, and it's a different monster. And the zombies aren't evil. They're just control. They just do what they're told. It's the squire. It's the
and although the source of danger in the film is essentially voodoo, again, it's it's not something which would have been dangerous by itself. It's only a threat because it's been co-opted by this colonizer guy and brought back to Britain for to use for his own purposes. So, and it's strangely unique that, as you say, too many, I think, of the Hammer films are actually not about Britain and not set within Britain, because they kind of strike this style of creating this kind of mythical, kind of Middle European setting that they often go back to.
Stories are set, but we always talk about Hammers being very British. Well, he's British, but they made relatively few films that were set in Britain.
Yeah,
and this is one of them, and it works really well. And they use Cornwall really well. It makes Cornwall seem quite exotic and quite because I used to go to Cornwall on holidays when I was younger, when I was with Mum and Dad, so I know Cornwall quite well, and it makes it seem quite a it's a very nice place, but in this film gives it a sort of atmosphere. It's very atmospheric.
Yeah.
All kind of films need good atmosphere and mood, and
it's beautifully shot and designed. It's got the complete dream team, the amazing musical score of James Bernard. It's got the photography of Arthur Grant. It's got the sets by Bernard Robinson. It's really is firing on all cylinders.
It's got the A-team. It's got all the top people making it.
Yeah.
Except the only thing is missing is Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee. But the actors they've got are
just as good. Just as good.
And it's more interesting that it is Andre Morel and John Carson, because they're doing it differently. You know how Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee would do it, as great as they are. But here, different actors are playing it, so they're giving it a different feel.
Yeah. And having fun doing it as well, and I think that communicates.
So, there's a story that Andre Morel, who was married to Joan Greenwood, lucky devil.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't tell Joan Greenwood that he was working on a zombie film because he thought she might disapprove.
Right.
So, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've heard.
No, he's great.
I met Hammer loads of times, so he must have enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's true. I think apparently, apart from the Hammer films, his major claim to genre memory is the fact that he was Professor Quatermass for the BBC in 1958, and when Hammer came to remake that Quatermass story in 1967, apparently they asked him first if he'd like to reprise the role, and he turned it down. Maybe he just felt, I've done that before. And I'm glad he did, because it allowed Andrew Keir to step in and give a great performance in that movie, and both of those takes on that story, the BBC one and the Hammer one, now stand for us to look at, and they're both great in different ways. I hope we
But again, it's part of that mid-60s resurgence. It's another classic Hammer film, great film when they're really, going for it. And
yeah.
So
I would say that the only real downside to The Plague of the Zombies is that the young leads, who are Brooke Williams and Diane Clare, are not the best ever. They're a little bit stiff. Although I do quite like Diane Clare, actually. The problem is more on his side.
I think she's dubbed, so...
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
She's a bit... I find her a bit weak. And I just... Williams, he's a good actor. He's in Where Eagles Dare.
Yes, he gets killed right at the beginning, doesn't he, of Where Eagles Dare?
He doesn't do much. But he's a good actor, but he's playing... I saw an interview with John Carson where he said that... he felt sorry for Brooke Williams because he was playing the sort of like the nice chap, the romantic lead, which is never very interesting. Whereas John Carson, was playing the wicked villain, and so he kind of sort of felt sorry for Brooke Williams because you've got not much to do with that part. You've just got to be nice and good and everything. I think he does it well. I think all the acting's good.
Yeah, no, there's no bad acting in it. It's just that they stand out as not being quite up to the standard being set by most of the other people in the movie, but there we go. Howard, we've run over our time, so I think that's pretty much sums up our recommendation of The Plague of the Zombies. I think the last word on that movie should be Andre Morel's last word. It is simply the word zombie. I love that bit.
It also says Haiti as well, which is very...
Oh yes, yeah.
Haiti all the time, I think so. or Haiti or something.
No, it's great. It's on the Horror Channel sometimes, folks. Keep an eye out and enjoy. Thanks, Howard. We'll be back with another Back of Death next time.
Cheerio.
It's the end of the episode, so that means recommendations. What have we got, folks? Kirsty?
So a nice segue from fun to more fun is I've been meaning to watch this for a long time and only got round to watching it a couple of weeks ago as a sort of Saturday night movie with my better half, and that is it's on Amazon Prime, As Above, So Below.
It's so good.
It's such a fun 90 minutes. I mean, completely ridiculous.
Is that the one in Paris?
Under Paris,
yeah.
I love the poster of that. I've not seen it.
Yeah. When he sees his friend in the burning car.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fan footage. I'm not. It's, the one thing that slightly annoys me is the sort of. I always think when you got fan footage, the kind of logic of the logic of the cameras needs to work. So we've got multiple cameras, people with head cams, so that's all good. But who the hell is editing this footage? Is my one question.
But it's found. Somebody else edits it.
No. But no, it doesn't work. But it is a lot of fun.
It's really good.
A lot of fun. And what I've discovered more recently is that I really like horror films where like I'm not like deeply disturbed to my very core. I like it to be, like Host was a kind of roller coaster. And experience and As Above, So Below gave me that kind of that experience.
Yeah.
So it's
nice.
Yeah, that really.
It's a great one.
Fantastic. Yes. Okay, Stella, what have you got?
I'm going to recommend a series called The Act. You may have heard of it. It's you can watch it on Stars Play if you got it via Amazon. If you get your 7-day free trial, you'll be able to watch it. So it's based on the true story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Dee Dee Blanchard and the Munchausen syndrome by proxy incident, where the mother kept the daughter ill and sick and had her treated for leukemia and kept her in a wheelchair, and she had a tube in her belly and shaved her head and all sorts of stuff in order to get money. And the daughter Gypsy believed that she was sick as well, and she eventually escapes and she murders her mother and leaves that way. So it's a true story. It happened in the Gypsy killed her mother in 2015. So it's true. There's various podcasts about it as well, but Joey King plays Gypsy Rose, which is the daughter, and Patricia Arquette plays Dee Dee Blanchard, and she was nominated for an Emmy, I think, for her role as Dee Dee. It's really, really good. It's a tough watch because obviously it's essentially about child abuse, but it's the two performances from Joey King and Patricia Arquette are incredible. It's really, really, really good, really good. And Chloe, what's she called? Chloe Sevigny? Sevigny. She's in it as well. Yeah. She's plays the neighbour. But yeah, it's on Stars Play. You can get a 7-day free trial and watch it. You'll be able to watch it in a couple of days. But it's really good.
Super. Thank you, Stella.
Yeah.
Ian?
Well, I've been very, very busy, but I'll just say I'm still hooked to, I don't know, Kirsty is, to Battersea Poltergeist, which is especially great because it's not just, hey, we made this thing and then we've recorded it and we're sticking it out one a week. They're sticking it out one a week and then it's interacting with the world because people are coming in with their own theories and their own ideas, and I just listened to the and they're now having to sort of create bonus episodes as well. Which one was just, I just listened to one today, and someone who they hadn't planned to be in the thing, but she was a neighbour of the haunted house. She was living next door when she was 5 years old. So they have, this is a haunting that's real, but they've sort of dramatised it, and they've got interview with the girl who was possessed at the time, who's now in her 70s, and it's just brilliant. But it's a Bafflegab are always good, as you know, and I think this is probably maybe their best. It's just so multi-layered, and it's not just it won't be the same listening to it all together. Although I would say to everyone, go and listen to it all together. It's the fact that people have interacted with the show and changed the show as it's been going along.
Cool.
With their different ideas, and it's I don't know, things that happen things that happen in that house.
It's bonkers.
It does make you go, is there something? Or
yeah, I must get on that.
Makes the third law of thermodynamics. But
anyway, don't burst the bubble.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so yet again, I will recommend Fantasy Podcast.
Cool. Yeah, okay, I must get on that. Will one of you remind me in a few days that I want to listen to it?
Absolutely.
So I keep going yes and then forgetting.
Well, it'll be on there for a month, but the last episode's on this week, whatever day it's.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tomorrow. Yeah. Well, it'll be yesterday when the podcast. This podcast is out.
So Thursday, basically.
Yeah. So it's that Thursday. So it's already out there. In the world.
Somebody remind me.
Yes. Yeah, that ending was amazing.
Right, smooth.
That's why I'm recommending it.
Yeah.
Very quickly, my recommendation is The Strain, which I've started watching since I began to watch it ages ago when we were talking about it on this show, and then couldn't find the rest of it anywhere. Well, it's appeared. It's on, for those of you who are subscribers to Disney Plus. Disney Plus now has a section called Star, which is where they put all their non-family material, basically all the back catalogue of 20th Century Fox and stuff, and that's where I found The Strain. There's lots of other stuff in there. It has a horror section. It doesn't have The Omen, but it has Damien Omen too. So Howard and I were talking about that on the podcast the other week, so go check that out.
Disney really have captured us. There's no having children. And now they've got this. And WandaVision is as good as everyone is saying. Fucking hell, WandaVision's amazing.
I must.
So good.
I'm gonna have to get a month free trial and watch WandaVision.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah,
definitely. And The Mandalorian and.
Oh no, I'm not watching that.
Brilliant. Anyway,
I don't like Star Wars.
This isn't Star Wars. It's just a Western where they all wear.
No.
Yeah.
It's too late to start that conversation.
Yes.
All right,
it's 9 o'clock.
My friends, it's been wonderful. Listeners, I hope you've loved listening to this extra long, extra in-depth podcast about Hannibal. There's more where this came from. Don't you worry. We'll be back here next week talking about I know not what. Have a good week. Thank you so much, my friends, Kirsty, Stella, Ian. It's been great fun, and we'll be back. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bon appetit.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow, T.D. Velasquez, Dr. Stella Gaynor, Ian Winterton, and Howard Whittaker. With special guests Dr. Rebecca Williams and Dr. Lori Hitchcock Morimoto. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast.